We'll call the meeting to order then. All board members are present for the roll call. And next would be approval of the minutes.
Move approval of all the minutes. Seconded.
Go ahead, Julie.
From Judy, is there any questions, additions, or omissions? Not seeing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Then we need a motion to approve the agenda. Is there any additions or changes?
Nope, as written.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And of course, my computer decides to act up. The next is public comments. Okay. Normally we have our person who tells us who's assigned.
Yeah, I don't think we
I don't think we have it.
there for public comments in person. The only one I saw was that, it may have just been a communication to the board that came in today via email regarding recording of meetings and feedback on that.
We have not? Okay. Well then, why don't we get right on to our student report, since they're anxiously waiting.
All right. Well, we hope you're all doing all right and staying warm because it's very cold right now. We were just walking into the building. So cold. But just to report, Quinn, do you want to start with student council?
So student council doesn't have a ton planned this month. We were planning on doing the craft Zoom that I mentioned last month, this past weekend, but we have to reschedule it, so that will be upcoming in the future. And just to recap, that's like where we're going to have kids from the community do a craft with some student council members over a Zoom call. And we're still planning on doing some sort of replacement for our usual JDRF, where we're going to give back to the community in certain ways, but we haven't had any set dates for that yet. Yeah, otherwise I don't think we have anything else planned as of right now for student council, but we're definitely going to do some more stuff in the spring for sure.
And in addition to student council, just to address the elephant in the room, we have been both going to hybrid learning.
Yeah.
It has been extremely helpful. I love it. I've talked to so many people who are in person as well, and they find it extremely helpful. And we're about, 3 weeks in now?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's been going really smoothly. I just went in today, and it's felt like everything's gone back to normal, aside from social distancing. It's been really nice to see everybody and get to know my teachers better. And yeah, that's all I can think about. Just everybody that I've talked to has found they've just improved their mood so much and just have absolutely loved being in person. And those who are virtual as well have also found themselves getting more used to the virtual setting as well. So both have been running really smoothly, and I think everybody's been doing pretty well. All the students have been pretty happy with it.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on the class and the coursework style, whether the hybrid is difficult to navigate through, and I think teachers are also settling because it's a big change to have half your students, through a computer and half them in front of you. But in my personal experience, I think it's been going pretty well. It just being in the classroom helps me focus definitely a lot more. So yeah, I guess we're really thankful that we've been able to have that opportunity open to us.
Extremely thankful. So, with that said, we also just wanted to mention just everything going on with like sports and maybe other extracurriculars as well. But I'm sure you guys have heard both our girls and boys basketball teams have been successful. Boys wrestling is going to state, and the girls basketball team is currently playing against SOC, and it's their senior night. So I can't think of anything else.
No, we don't have a ton of updates for student council this month, but yeah. So I think that's kind of it. People are definitely adjusting to the new hybrid, and we haven't had. I think this is our third week, and there have been some interruptions with snow days and virtual days and stuff like that.
Yes.
But yeah, people are still settling into that.
How's the process getting into school and leaving school and changing between classes?
I think it's been pretty successful. I mean, for me, I drive to school, I walk in, go to my class, and go to my next class and such. I haven't seen too much like congregating or issues with that. So I think people realize that this is kind of our shot at being in person. So. Yeah.
Do you help wipe the desk off, or does the teacher wipe the desk off? How's that working?
So in most of my classes, it's a little different per class, but some of them have student volunteers, like one person will spray on the desk and the next person will wipe them down. And
Nice.
sometimes they'll just have one student spray them and then the teacher will wipe them down during the passing period.
Okay.
And other classes, I think the teacher just does it in between classes.
But there is enough time and you feel
Yeah, yeah,
clean and safe and...
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the schedule's definitely been running smoothly, and also it's been very efficient because you have to go, every time you enter the building, you have to have a health slip like you have outside of the room right there. And it's been very efficient. If some students have forgotten their health slip, which I think is a low number of students, but they just take your temperature, whoever's standing at the door, and just make sure that everything's all right, and then you're good to go. So it's really quick and efficient and very safe. And teachers and any staff at the high school have been handling it very smoothly. So it's very good.
So the most important question is, should snow days be snow days or virtual days?
That's a really good question.
Be careful how you answer.
I guess it depends on how tired I am that morning. Yeah. I mean, to answer that truthfully, I guess it's hard because you want to, especially this year since we've had to cut classes down so much, we want to take advantage of all the time that we can. But also, I mean, I'm not going to lie and say that when I hear that we don't have like classes that day, I'm not super bummed. But I definitely understand both sides.
Cool. Good answer.
Well, thank you very much.
You should be a politician.
Are there any other questions that you guys have?
Alright, awesome.
Thank you, lady.
Thanks, ladies. Thank you.
Nice to see everybody.
Yeah,
Have a good night.
Next is WTA.
Hello. Well, I guess I don't have much to share, just a few things. I'll start with snow days, since that's what we kind of left off on. Not necessarily if we should have them or not, but just an appreciation that we received notice for the previous snow day. So we were able to, take our materials home from school. We had everything at our house that we would need so that we could do our either synchronous or asynchronous teaching on that Thursday of last week. So thank you for kind of the foreknowledge that we would be having that snow day that day. We'd also like to appreciate the ability to sit through the Ross Green PD in January. I think it was very valuable. A lot of schools had read his book, Lost at Schools, but not all of them, especially at the secondary level. So I thought it was a good opportunity to hear kind of his philosophy on behavior and how kids will do well if they can. And looking at behavior as far as like a lagging skill and how we can address those that way. So we look forward to continuing with delving into that topic. And then finally, I know I talked about vaccines in January as well, but now a lot of our special ed teachers have received their second dose, or they're in the process of doing that. And so the rest of us are patiently waiting for hopefully March 1st to roll around when Group 1B has their turn. That's all I have for tonight.
Same question for you. Processes. So working for teachers, in and out, and teach.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit of a transition. I'm at the elementary level, and some schools have duties for their teachers. Other schools haven't traditionally had a lot of duties as far as extra assignments before school and in the middle of school or between sessions and then after school. So I do think it put a little bit more responsibility on some some teachers' shoulders if that was their role, but I think it has been running smoothly. I know sometimes when students come and they don't have their temperature filled out, teachers will kind of like put them to the side to like warm up their bodies a little bit just to get an accurate reading, especially with the the thermometer that you point at their forehead. Their foreheads get cold. So, but other than that, I think it's been going pretty smoothly.
Good.
Good. Good to hear. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Exactly.
Next then is individual board reports on any education-related events people have attended, which the state convention will be last. Seeing none, I guess that moves on to the state convention.
All right. Unfortunately, the state convention happened 2 weeks after my surgery, so I was sitting and standing and sitting and standing and missed a lot probably. But I thought it went well for a virtual convention. There was a lot of good discussion as in the delegates area, and I sent all that information out to all of you. Both the resolutions before they were voted, and then some of the discussion as we went through each resolution along the way. And as a board, we voted to adopt all of them. There were some amendments along the way. One thing I guess was an eye-opener for me is you're doing this as a state convention, so you've got Madison School District and Green Bay and La Crosse, but you also have small school districts that I've never even heard of around the state, and they see things much differently in resolutions. And so it was good to sort of sit back and listen to why somebody would object or amend to a resolution that looked like it was something that we should all adopt, But it was, even though they were adopted, there were people that got some amendments along the way. But I thought it was very beneficial to listen to people around the state sort of plead their case of why the resolution fit their needs or didn't fit their needs. So I sent that all to you, and I also sent you the resolutions as well. Because, and I don't know if in the past they record every session when it's live. Well, they do now, when it's virtual. So if you have access to the convention website, they're all recorded. The ones that I went in was access to public records and personnel files, which was very interesting, following up on some discussions that we've had recently, which it was good that I retained some of that stuff because I knew what Brian was talking about. And I did take the deep dive into the financial 1 and 2, and I feel grateful, and I wrote Steve Summers a note saying thank you for being here because he really dumbs it down for me to make it a little bit more understandable as financing, because it gets extremely complicated along the way. So, and then I went back and have sort of been picking off a few of these to review since they're recorded. And the onboarding of new board members, which I was interested in because my onboarding was a little different this year. But from what I hear and what we have set up in the past, we are following their recommendations pretty close to the T. So very proud of the orientation program that is established here, and hopefully when we get a new board member on board that maybe I'll tag along as well and and knock my orientation out as well a little bit too to get some more information. But so I would if you have any interest, there's 3 full days of stuff regarding COVID and how to deal with COVID, student learning, disabilities, certain legislation that has gone down, finance. You all know if you sat on this committee that there's a lot of different topics. They're all recorded, so if you need access, let me know. But it'd be worth the time to really sort of dive into those.
Do you have to, would you have had to sign up for the conference in order to get access to the recording?
I think I got to go in through the conference.
Right.
to get in there. But I'm not sure if how they're managing it right now.
Yeah, I'm not exactly. We can look into that, Jeff.
But there's a lot of good information. They're all about an hour long. So,
Any other questions? Then we'll move on to the timeline for the board and superintendent evaluations. All of you who haven't done your school perception survey that was due by today are in trouble, so I'm in trouble. Too many trips to Eau Claire on weekends. So those were supposed to be turned in today, or by today, but your password will still work, so you have another month. Superintendent evaluation and priorities are distributed here. They're attached to the board agenda, and they are to be returned by the end of March. After the March board meeting, there'll be an individual reminder to all of you that they still need to be turned in, and then there'll be the special board meeting to go over the evaluations in April. Any questions?
If I can add something, Dave, under the evaluations piece that there's obviously the superintendent evaluation form is in there. And then there's also a separate document that's kind of a board goals evaluation, superintendent's combined goals evaluation. When I look back for the current year, I didn't have anything that was specifically written for this year, but I was trying to go back to our last retreat we did, which might have been last spring, and I recall we kind of put a verbal piece to put some stuff aside and focus on COVID, and then kind of where we were with referendum pieces. So those were the two. But just for our edification planning forward, I did include the 1920, so last year's goals, just so that we don't lose sight of where we were, because some of those were multiple year pieces. So as far as the board goals evaluation, if they want us to populate it with a piece that talks about the COVID planning and referendum, we can, but I don't really, we never really wrote anything specific. I think at that point we realized that we had quite a bit of work ahead of us, and that was where our focus was. So just looking for a little guidance if you want to have something of that included, or if you want to forego that, and at the meeting when we do our eval, we kind of reboot this process for the following year. But that's why I included the ones from a year ago, just to give you a starting point. I think that'll be something that Rebecca's going to need to know as far as how we want to move forward.
So basically the question is, do we do an actual goals evaluation this year, or do we just establish the goals for next year?
Right. I think that's accurate.
I think we established goals for next year.
Right.
This year is a kind of a hard year to evaluate.
Yeah, because I think our conversation at the point when we were doing this was that our focus needed to be towards all the pieces associated with the pandemic, and then to evaluate where we were with referendum pieces, which I think we've done. But all right, so I think we'll just leave that piece off. We'll deal with the superintendent's evaluation, and then we will, at that meeting, we can regroup on where we move forward. And as a point of reference, you have the ones from 1920 in front of you.
I've not seen the head knots. That's what we're going to do, is just go forward and not do the evaluation of goals this year. The board retreat follow-up, there was expression at the board retreat of basically two types of listening sessions, one with staff and one with parents. This fall, when we did staff, it was by building, but it was Zoom. Do you want to do the same thing for spring? Do you want it to be an in-person? Do you want it to be Zoom?
I don't think we're ready to go in person, or if we were, I'm not sure the staff still feel comfortable with that. I think the Zoom would be better, but I think we said retreat, we recommended going as we have by building, because that's what most people are used to.
Yeah, I think that's how we did it in the fall, and it seemed to work pretty well. On the community side, the difficulty, I would guess, is many board members would want to participate in that. If we get over 3, it becomes a public meeting, but since it's parents anyway, it's in effect a public meeting. The only thing you'd be looking at is, you know, someone from outside the community or outside the school district being in, but I would think nobody would really have much fun with that. So hopefully that won't happen, but if we do declare it as a public meeting, we will have to vote and set a meeting date, but then say that's what the agenda item is, and it would just, we'd be using the school's Zoom account, which would allow, is it 1,000 participation? Is it that number?
We've got a pretty big number, particularly if we go through the webinar piece.
Which should be more than enough, I would think.
How many were you thinking?
Well, when Mike and I did kind of one, we had 200 something?
I thought I got like 330, something like that.
Did he get up to 300?
Yeah.
I know it was over 200. But it actually worked pretty well. If we pick one member or someone to basically handle the lineup, which is just basically keeping track of who's next in the queue, one person just moderating. You make it very clear that this is a listening session, not an answering session. And most people accepted that really well, and so it moved along pretty good. It would be a similar format to that, but we would have to pick a date and obviously vote a meeting in. I think we can probably work on this month and then set the date at the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I wanted to propose something else just to get feedback on, because at the retreat, what we talked about was certainly the staff listening session piece, and then also a forum similarly for the community. One of the things that I guess I'm finding with is just parent questions, is I'm answering the same questions over and over. I mean, there's a lot of questions out there. There's things that I think are great questions, but we're just answering them in different pockets, because I think a lot of our information is coming here. Annie's doing a good job pushing it out. But I do wonder if there's a point where we need, if to go back to like this summer, we did a webinar with the community. I'm wondering if and I'm just targeting as I'm looking at this when we meet and what our schedule looks like, that first week in March, maybe doing a piece after we've been in place here for a few weeks with our 5 through 12 piece, being able to update the community on some of the things that are happening, what we're seeing with up until now, and then our foreshadowing of where we're going the rest of the year, and then open it up for, it can be a listening session or a question piece, but it'd be a piece that I would feel comfortable being able to, either between myself and a member or two of our team, to present some information just to make sure we hit the pertinent pieces for families, and then open it up for listening or questions that administratively we'd be able to ask. And then I think at that point we had all the board members involved with that type of a format. Now that's a little different than I think what we talked about towards the end of the school year, but as I have found it very valuable on a monthly basis, I've opened up our webinar with staff. Are we getting about 60, 70 people, Annie, every month for that, and that's a presentation of kind of the pertinent information, and then I open it up for a Q&A at the end. So that's been, I think, at least from my end, it's been a good discussion and getting some pertinent questions that staff have. So just wanted to open that up and see, are you interested in us moving in a direction like that, or do you want to stay with the timelines and the process of kind of what we talked about at the retreat?
The idea intrigues me. I almost hesitate suggesting adding more to the platter. But with that kind of a format, would we serve ourselves better in terms of accessing information, and the community better to have two smaller sessions, one 7-12 and one K-6, so that there's actually an opportunity for people I worry about having such a significant group that some questions aren't going to be addressed or delivered because there's just so many from many different areas. But then instead of having, let's say, one for 2 hours, maybe we have two for 45 minutes or something.
I think we did.
Or an hour each.
This
I don't know.
past summer we did, the same day we did 2 of them. If I recall, we did one in the afternoon and
Yeah.
we did one in the evening. It was the same presentation, same format.
Sure.
They were an hour and a half long.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just an idea. I've been talking to a few people and wanting to kind of revisit what we talked about at the retreat, and just wanted to throw that out there to see the interest of the board with regards to that.
I think these are two different things.
Yeah.
One the thing you're talking about doing with parents is similar to what you do with staff.
That's right.
But that's a totally different thing than
That's
us
right.
doing a listening session with staff, or us doing a
Right.
listening session with parents.
Agreed. Agreed.
And because I just think this year especially, parents need to be able to tell us what they're looking at as we're starting to look at next school year.
Yeah.
And it's, in my mind, it's gonna be a lot more wide open and a lot more talking about what they want in the direction of the school. Your thing is about informing where the school is at and where you're heading right now.
Right.
I guess I see them as two different events.
I don't see that it has to be a replacement for what you're thinking about later on in the spring. I just wanted to thinking that bringing something in earlier might be positive.
I don't see it as quite the same way. I think you almost need to frame a listening session with information, because I think that might all of a sudden answer some of the comments or questions that people might have. So if you bring in what we've been doing, what things are like, and where you're going, that would help. And I think people would come up with their own questions then after they've heard what you had to say. So I like the idea of you presenting something and then opening it up. And I think you're smart to divide it elementary, high school, or some way like that, because I think there are so many different specific questions. So I would go that way.
I think what you proposed, Randy, I think people would like to do that sooner than later, but maybe after you do that. I think when we get closer to the end of the year, as we project toward next year, what David is thinking about, where we want to have kind of the sky's the limit, tell us what we should be thinking about. But, and I like the 2 sessions because they're so specific, but, you know, targeting that within the next month, I think would be.
Yeah, and this was never meant to be proposed to replace what you were talking about. I
Right.
just felt between now and May is a long time.
Right.
And wanted
and
to put something in the
yeah.
middle there, and I felt
Yeah.
that there's probably a space that I feel like
Yeah.
I need to
Mhm.
be in that piece. So I was thinking that first week in March, when I just look at kind of where we are with some of the other things we have
But
going.
then, for what you're talking about, I would think early May would make more sense.
I think.
You don't want it
what-
too late. That means
Right.
you get much later than that, we're in trouble.
Right.
You don't want the school year over.
You don't want it over, but you want to see where the disease is at too.
Yep.
You know, it's too early right now to start talking about fall because we don't know where it's gonna go. So I like doing what you're talking about, David, in the beginning of May. But I think our public would love to have an opportunity to, you know, talk about what they're seeing right now.
Yeah.
So the idea would be Randy does his March timeframe, ours probably a few weeks before the end of the school year.
And I would put one that I'm looking at kind of being more actively part of, being certainly, and having any of the board members there, we can just post it that you'd be present.
Yeah.
We can always listen.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can go in, I mean, it's either way.
So I guess,
All right.
maybe I heard it wrong. It sort of sounded like yours, even in March, your discussion would be a little bit about sort of forecasting.
I think it's,
I worry about that because there's still a lot of unknowns.
oh, there is.
And
There's
so-
tons. I guess I'm trying to think, when I look at what I think it's a review of where we're at, what we're looking at, and then just talking about some of the things that potentially can be, I can't give you.
That's your
specifics.
planning.
It's a planning,
Yeah.
and I can project what I'm hearing and what may be coming. Nothing's concrete until it comes.
Right, no, I just know.
Yeah.
Sometimes the public hears one thing,
They
and
do.
but I think the planning issue is always pushback that we got this year is like, well, how come we not planning when the whole last 10 months was planned behind? So I think the
Right.
planning aspect is more.
Right, and so my timing was kind of trying to do some things prior to the next board meeting in March, so that there was at least a piece that, and some of that would be an overlap of what you all would hear here too, or be pertinent for you to hear. But wanted to do it. I just think if we get too late, I thought there should be something in the middle, so that's what I'm proposing. So if the board's comfortable with that, we can Yeah.
So why wouldn't you have it, yours towards like the middle of March, end of March, and the board listening, because now, as Judy has indicated, you framed, where we're going and what we're doing. You have it in February,
I would say beginning of March, yeah, but we
beginning of
can,
March, but still, then there's a big time gap between, your presentation and what Dave is proposing to feedback.
and there's also potential reason to say, you have a new order that takes effect on Wednesday. There'll be a new one that comes out in March. It could be you do it immediately after that order at some point, so you can kind of talk a little bit about that. So those are all.
I think it's good, for you to put the presentation on. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Zoom call where you get 800 people at it. But I think if you could do similar to what you're doing with the teachers for the community, saying, okay, this is what we're under, and you could do that on a monthly basis.
Sure.
And that way, when all of these, and maybe you do it like right after these orders come out.
Sure.
And, we disseminate them and figure out what does that mean towards education.
I'm
That
open to
way, they're getting information and getting an understanding of why are we doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And, then, in May, if that's late April, early May, mid-May, whenever that is, then I think you're gonna get a lot more feedback because they have a lot more information.
That's fair.
Any other comments? Then we'll work on basically that two-step approach.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Next was a discussion about
Just
the,
before we go, do you want to do them like right after the orders come out? Because we've probably got a handful of orders, for Randy's. Or are we just going to do one and that's it?
Are you talking about the board one, or are you talking about the one that?
Yes.
well, you're not really sure when
So I
PHLBC
propose
is going to
that
put out
we let
an
Randy
order.
think this thing through a little bit. I don't want to put a man down to have a monthly meeting with the community on top of everything else we've been doing. I'd say let's try the first one, see how it works. And
Right.
then if you see it's workable and beneficial, then we can move forward with it.
Right. And right now, I guess I'm thinking in my head is, and you're right, public health can do an order, they could redo it in a week. Right now they have monthly orders, so my thought would be I would do it sometime after the deadline of the current one comes up second week in March. Maybe it's immediately a day or so after that. We'd have at least an understanding of what it means.
Right.
So that might be a way to do it.
But if you educate or at least inform the public, they understand
Right.
why we're doing what we're doing.
Yep, agreed. And that's the concept. Great.
Okay, the next is about the goals committee. At the board retreat, it was discussed that the goals committee should start putting together a set of goals for next year. And I know the budget committee has started to set up a goals, so maybe you want to mention that first,
Yep.
on where that is.
Yeah, under the budget committee's agenda tonight, you will see that the budget committee put forth some priorities to be looking at for this school year. We kind of put them into three different categories, one being under financial goals, one being under programmatic goals, and one being under more strategic initiatives. So those are three categories to help guide some of our budget process. As we talked about it at the budget committee, there was also a desire to also have kind of a broader conversation about some of the other things within the district besides those pieces that are just dictated by the financial meeting. So I think we're looking at, when we get to scheduling meetings tonight, to want to schedule a goals committee that could then kind of take, and I think there'll be some overlap between the budget ones and the other, but I think it's a good conversation to kind of start with.
And plus using the conversations from our retreat to help
Right.
them with that.
I think the other thing too, you know, everything that comes out of the goals requires some type of financial commitment generally. And we've got 85% of our budget is salary, 15% goes to, you know, other things. So when we start looking at that, how do we formulate the budget in such a way that if we think this program's got to move forward and it's a 3-year program, we start looking at it more instead of 1 year at a time. We start looking at it over a several-year process.
Right. So to me, I think when we get to scheduling meetings, we schedule a goals committee with that being one of the topics that we're addressing.
I just would like to say a couple things about setting priorities. In general, I feel setting priorities has been difficult for us as a board. I think we have utilized board evaluations and superintendent evaluations as a discussion and pointing toward our priorities. I think we need a bigger vision, like the vision of our school. Do we have a priority which is somewhat tied to student outcomes and communication? I don't know, as you take this to the goals committee, and I know that, you know, that's where it probably should start, I would just request that we don't limit it to what our evaluations, because, you know, are those tools even the best tools? And suddenly our priorities come out of evaluations instead of a broader look at our whole organization and what should be driving us. Is it student achievement, student outcomes? I mean, is there some data that we should be looking at that might, you know, point to a weakness that should drive a priority? And I would like a broader look.
And I'd like to remind everyone that no matter what committee meeting is, all board members can be there. So if you feel that you want to have that input in there to make sure it's there, we always know the first draft tends to form the discussion on what ends up being the final draft. So I encourage you to be there and be part of that to make sure that that happens.
I would submit that we, as a board, start looking visionary, to your point, you know, because, you know, we look at it on an annual basis. But again, you know, when you start looking at the budget and so forth, you know, that the goals are going to require some funding. So I think there is a balance between those. And we got to start looking at, you know, what's 3 years out or what's 4 years out and how do we get there? And start putting a plan. You know, one of the things we talked about, you know, from an HR standpoint, we understood that our paras were, you know, weren't making, you know, where they should be, so we put a 3-year plan together to get them there. And, you know, so we got to look at, you know, all of these things, you know, as we move forward. And I think what can ultimately happen is if we set that framework up, then when we go to the retreat, if we have an annual retreat, that's driving the agenda.
Any other comments? Then at the end of the meeting, we'll definitely set that goals committee. Another issue that's come up, review streaming and recording practices of the school board meetings and committees. Our past practice, the policy 189 is here, which states that basically full board meetings are live streamed and recorded. Committee meetings, it's up to the committee to vote and determine whether they want it recorded or streamed. There's been some public comments about the fact that we were doing committee meetings. We did that just like we've done other things. COVID hit, it had to change the practices. We wanted as much openness as possible. So for a while there, we were doing everything by Zoom meetings, so we were streaming and recording committee meetings. As COVID started to come down, we started opening more things up, more in-person participation. We took the committee meetings back in general, except for the medical committee meeting. We took it back to we're not doing them unless the committee decides to do it. There were a lot of comments on the co-curricular committee meeting, people in that last couple of days saying, how come it's not being live streamed suddenly? Well, the month before, we decided not to and go back to previous practice. Based on the public comments, though, we wanted to bring it back again for the board to discuss this. Do we want to set up the policy that committee meetings are, or do we leave it and that basically at the next meeting of each committee, they should take that vote and register how they want that committee meeting run or streamed?
I think you either have to do it or not, you know?
Well,
Can I talk the technical part first? So that
Well,
then you
there's
can.
the technical.
So the technical piece is right now, like right now, we are being recorded and we're being streamed. That's what Brian's doing in the back. Obviously, we have a new system, and then that was really built off of feedback on some of the sound quality, etc. This is still being tweaked, so this is going to be continually improving over probably by next month will be at a much higher level even than where we're at today. The person who can run the system right now is Brian. Now we have more people we need to train on this, and then we can, so if we want to have things live streamed, there's two options. One is the best live stream quality is what Brian's doing right now with the multiple cameras around the room. So that's the live stream piece. That comes off of there. We also have Zoom, which is what we did co-curriculars with. Now we had a number of people on the Zoom call, but we've also conceptualized, even if we don't have anybody there, we can set up a Zoom call to record it. I don't need somebody in the back to do that. And then we could post it after the meeting's done. But if we're going to have somebody recorded in the back, they might as well live stream it, because that's what happens in the back corner. If all we want is a simple recording of it, we can do that via Zoom without having additional people here. So that's kind of the logistics of it. We can do either one.
But I think as I read through those series of emails, they weren't necessarily asking for live streaming of the committee meetings. You know, I want to, you know, I can't, you know, I want to watch it at my leisure.
Right.
So if you had it recorded and posted, you know, I think that would solve the issue of seeing what's going on.
I'm totally fine with recording committee meetings. I don't think we need to live stream.
Are you okay with it being recorded similarly to how we did it for co-curriculars? The quality's not as good, but you get the sound pieces, I think, and you maybe don't get the zooming into Mark's face like Brian can do. But we can do many of the other pieces. We can share screens, we can do all the things where we can put it all up so the community can see what we're doing. But it would be through more of a Zoom recording. So that would be what I think you're talking about, and if the board's amenable to that, that's pretty simple for us to do.
I would suggest we start with that. I think the critical thing was having access to the committee meetings. And how do you take that away once we've given that access in a more convenient way? So if we can initially start with the recording, and then if we find we need to enhance it because it's a little muddled because of the technology, then we advance it down the road. But right now, if we can do it with a Zoom piece, I would say that's a great starting point. We record it, and then if there's a need to change it, we do.
Yeah, and I would think we probably still need to look at some of the sound for Zoom.
Right.
On where the sound is. Because I know Brian, how was it the other day with all the coaches? I heard a couple wasn't that great. But maybe been there.
It was mostly good.
Okay.
I can mostly hear everything.
Okay, so,
I think the sound was good on the people who were not in the room. Listening to the people in the room was very difficult.
yeah, that's what I was hearing too. So, okay.
Okay, I think we're getting the intent of the group, so we should have a policy redo on 189 then, stating that committee meetings shall be taped and may be broadcast upon a vote of the majority of the committee. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah.
I guess the other thing is, reading through that policy, it says we hold these indefinitely. We have them on here. And, you know, what I would do is say, you know, there's record retention requirements. What are the record retention requirements, you know, for these meetings? And, you know, what is that, 5 years, maybe 7 years?
And I think the requirement probably calls for minutes. Probably, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think there's any requirement that we keep them.
No, I think that's just, I don't think I don't think that has a records requirement. That would be a good one to check on, but I think the record we would have to record and keep for the X number of years is the recording of the motions and the decisions, which is completed in the minutes. But we can look into that.
Well, what I would suggest, if all we have to keep is the records of the motions and so forth, once we can get rid of those, then I would get rid of the recording.
Sure.
You know,
We can
so
update that on the policy too. then.
Yep.
so
they're
it
changing the dates.
comes in line with your record retention.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're going to have servers upon servers.
Okay, so we'll have the policy committee go through 189 and make 2 changes.
Yep.
I should take care of that part of the agenda. And that takes us to board resolution. Would you like to present your resolution?
How would you like me to?
Well, we have the resolution in the attachment, but due to live streaming, you should probably read it.
I wonder if we can bring it up here
Or at
too.
least bring, yeah.
Sure, it's long, Dave, I appreciate you putting this on the agenda. I didn't write this 100%. This is largely cribbed from the resolution that the U.S. Senate passed in, I believe, 2019, with slight adaptations for our area. When I thought about doing something like this or asking the board to have recognition for Black History Month, I thought back to the last 2 years where I've been on the board and we haven't done this. And I went back and tried to see if we've ever actually done one, and I couldn't find one. And I'll speak from my, I guess, place of privilege and where I used to think about these kind of resolutions is that, well, whatever. It's just some people sitting in a room saying they feel this way. It doesn't actually do anything. So why do it? And I used to really feel that way, and the one thing that I still continue to feel about that is that nothing on this document does anything other than acknowledge that we know this is true. And that's half the battle. One of the things that's been closest to me, and this has come out in our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee meetings, is that many of us are living with a profound amount of advantages that we don't necessarily recognize. And taking that step back and realize that you have those advantages is the first step in trying to be more inclusive in general. So I always came at things like this from the advantage of, well, if you have 1 month for one group, you have to have another month for another group until ad nauseum they don't mean anything anymore. But in the environment we're in now, with the things that have happened in the last year, I mean, beyond COVID-related issues, the thing that I included in here that I thought was most important is that good people can't remain silent. And we have to distinguish ourselves by saying we're going to do certain things. Now, this resolution isn't actually doing anything, but it's saying that we will, and that there are things we have to work on going forward. So I appreciate this being considered. I hope everyone had the opportunity to read it. And I appreciate the good people from the U.S. Senate who wrote most of it, and I plagiarized most of it from them. So, that's all.
I would like to make an amendment to the resolution that the 6 school buildings fly the Juneteenth flag during Black History Month. if that's all right with you.
Need a second for your motion?
Yeah.
Second.
We're doing that, we started that last year, and we made it a continuing resolution for LGBTQ. And I think I was talking with some members of our community who this applies to, and they suggested the Juneteenth flag because of how it's recognized. And since we don't have school during Juneteenth, our student body would not see the flag if it was good during Juneteenth. So they suggested flying it in recognition of this. There are some Black History Month flags, but they're widely different, and there isn't really been one that's been per se recognized in any way. But the Juneteenth flag has been, so they suggested using that.
Do we have Juneteenth flags in the district?
I'll get them. We don't need 6, so. It was also discussed by Jack about the idea of, I think it was you who brought it up, about the idea of how do we decide these flags and stuff like that. And I think that is something over time we're going to have to start discussing or figure out a way to make sure we don't have some strange overlap or issue. My first thought was that we could potentially ask the Diversity Ad Hoc Committee to address or help us determine what would be appropriate, what types of groups or times, or a reasonable calendar that we might want to consider, instead of just doing these as a one-shot events, of actually getting it a little bit more organized and making sure that we aren't leaving anyone out, but that we aren't going over. But that would be a separate item. So right now we have a resolution with a possible addition to it. Taking that as a motion with an amendment, we would vote on the flag issue first, whether to include that with the resolution, and then vote on passing the resolution. So, any further discussion on the amendment? All those in, well, we're in mask. We said we would always do these by voice vote. Name votes, just to make sure. So first, Brandt?
Aye.
Engbertson?
Aye.
Ensign?
Aye.
Heineman?
Aye.
Etzel?
Aye.
Hefner?
Paper.
Sorry. You know, my name gets butchered. I practice butchering other people's. And myself, aye. So the amendment's done. Now we're back onto the main resolution. Any discussion? I think based on what just happened, I'm just going to say all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you very much for doing that, Mike, and thank you everyone for your support.
So just to summarize real quickly, so obviously the resolution was passed, and then part of the resolution would be the Juneteenth flag flown in February.
For the Black History.
For Black History.
Then, get back out of the resolution. I think that completes the board part of the meeting. And we are on to our committee reports, and the first one is Human Resources Committee.
I'll just comment a few things about the HR meeting that we had. In addition to negotiating with our WTA leadership each year, we give them an opportunity to exchange talking points. And the talking points usually involve working conditions, contract conditions, contract language, anything that in the past might have come across as a negotiation, which we are not able to do. So I have been involved in HR since I've been on the board, and I have to say this particular exchange of talking points was really a give and take of not only their dissatisfaction with some items, but also solutions. They offered thoughts of how we might make things better and more cohesive, and The notes are pretty complete. I'm not going to talk about each one of our talking parts. Please make sure that you read them. And in follow-up, I know that tonight we are going to be setting an HR meeting sometime probably next week to follow up with some of the items that came up in these talking points to see what kind of movement we could make as a board with some of their concerns. But it was a great session, I felt, and I know Brian and Judy and Brian were there. If you guys want to add anything?
No, I thought it was a good give and take, and it was very informative. So I appreciated the candor of everyone.
And there's nothing to vote on or anything. And if anybody has any questions, Brian would answer them, so feel free. Thank you.
Seeing none, we will move on to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
Sure, thank you, Dave. I think the minutes largely reflect most of what we discussed. We've had an additional meeting to finish up the second portion of the equity audit, and if I hadn't entirely explained exactly what the equity audit was, it's effectively a system in which the committee is going through more or less our own understanding of how well the district is doing in a wide variety of things, and I think that will produce a report at the end of this that more or less says where the committee sees things. But I guess the one drawback I've seen of this over time is that it's largely reliant on the understanding or the information that the committee actually has about things. So if people don't know something exists, you may have responses that are belying just general level of ignorance of like what the district is doing. So that is also revealing because what's notable in the discussion we have is that basically the staff members of the committee seem to know exactly what the district's doing, but all the public members of the committee don't. I mean, and I'll be honest, I don't know some of the things the district is doing because I don't live it all day, every day. So the staff is teaching everyone else about everything, but we realize, well, we only have like 8 or 9 or 10 members of the community in this committee. We're not really reaching that many people by telling about what we're doing. So if anything's coming out of it, it's the idea that we should be communicating about some of the good work that we're doing and adding more onto that good work. We have a meeting next week, I believe. I don't think the agenda is entirely set for that yet, but some of the things we were discussing are, any kind of interim recommendations, things that we're seeing that the board could do sooner rather than later, rather than having to wait for the committee to totally wrap up its recommendations in the future. And I don't think we've even set the agenda for that yet entirely. We did have the opportunity to kind of go over some of the things that have happened recently in the news, the issue with Sun Prairie, and some of the things that fell through the cracks there. And we had just a generally good discussion about how something like that could happen there, how something like that could happen here. I mean, that was the thing that the issue that happened in Baraboo that was one of the spurring moments of why this committee was formed in the first place, to try to avoid things like that happening. So I think this is the first meeting, the one we had last week is the first one that Tim actually missed, and I really wanted to ask him how curriculum would avoid having some random curriculum get out there into the ether and cause a huge problem. So I'm sure we'll be asking him about that in the future. But beyond that, we're getting into the stage where I think we're having some really good conversations and some hard questions being asked. So I encourage everybody to watch future meetings, and hopefully if they're being recorded, we can make them accessible too. So I think that's everything. Thank you to Rebecca again for doing those minutes.
So do we have a scope on this committee? You know, what problem are you trying to solve yet, or are you still trying to figure that out? Or because I see there's some deviation into ADA compliant buildings, which we're probably got some type of report on that, making sure that we're as compliant as possible. So.
Well, that's what the committee was formed for. The charter includes everything from issues of race and class to issues of accessibility. One of the reasons we put that in there is I have colleagues in the community who have just mentioned that when they've gone into schools, I think there was like a village president listening session that Chris went and had in Arboretum one day, and they were surprised at the difficulty of getting into the library in Arboretum for some reason. That was just something that came up, that we have a lot of buildings that are used by the public that weren't necessarily designed for accessibility and all things. We've heard about, bathrooms in the high school as a possible issue. That was one topic that came up, just in that, are we really looking at that? And Jack, you'll remember the facility committee meeting we had last year where it became obvious that there were just issues of doors not opening that we had no idea that a student really needed, and for a year was taking a half-mile loop around the middle school just to get over to the high school. So the discussion that we had on disabilities and accessibility too is just kind of looping into that as to whether or not do we need to take a harder look at all the buildings to see whether or not things are accessible. Do we need to go and look at websites to make sure they're accessible, because the ADA applies to public institutions for how the websites work so that they're accessible for blind and deaf people.
Are we doing that, Randy? Or?
We've done many of the things on the website with more things that need to be done. The facilities pieces, as we've gone through like our 20-year facility maintenance plan, obviously working with our partners at EUA and Vogel, they can point to the items that would need, that as we went through and would touch them or remodel them, would need to be upgraded. I mean, the example I've used in conversations around this topic is when you go to Heritage and you go across from the larger gym upstairs and you have the bathrooms up there. I mean, those are items that at some point, if we were at a future point, if we were going to keep that long term, we're going to want to update those bathrooms. We certainly have ADA accessible bathrooms. Those just aren't the best examples of that, and they make it hard for some people to get in and out. So accessibility there is maybe a little bit of an issue, but there is a bathroom accessible at another location within close proximity. And those are pieces that it's not things that we're not in compliant with. It's things that as we do some of the work, we have to continue to rise compliance to current standards. So those are some of the things that we have. I had a conversation with a member of the committee brought up elevator access. And as far as a staff member who may need to use an elevator for purposes and needing to have a key to go into it. So that's a piece that we'll follow up with. And it's kind of a challenge there, because you certainly want to have elevator access, but you also don't want to have young children going up and down and getting into a situation that's not appropriate either. So those are pieces that we definitely have some information on, and certainly areas that as we start to have some other conversations facility-wise, they fit in.
Just want to compliment you and the committee, and some real rich conversations, obviously, and appreciate all the work you're doing. Question I have going forward, is there a thought about rotating membership? For example, at the end of the school year, would that be the time to look at replacing some of the student teachers coming in next year? And you don't want to replace everyone because you don't want to start from scratch. You got to have but I think that's something I don't think I want to say this is how it should be done, but I think there should be some thought to how we go forward and continue enriching the committee with new membership, but maintaining enough old membership so that it's not starting over every year. Some of our school committees have a 2-year cycle, as an example. They provide opportunities for people to step down after 2 years if they wish, or to continue on. And I think it's something we need to think about going forward, not necessarily March or April, but going into the end of the school year, so that direction, so that we keep the momentum going.
I guess my understanding of this committee is it was more finite in time, and there would be any recommendations coming out of it. And maybe one of the recommendations might be that we need to continue ongoing. And then in what Mark is saying, I think is really valuable. But I guess I need to look at, you Mike, and look at what do you feel the longevity of this committee and their work and their recommendations? I mean, is it something that is more finite or more just getting started?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it was drafted as a finite committee that would last 12 to 18 months, and at the end of it would hopefully produce
Right.
some form of a report or final recommendations. And the discussion we've had most recently is, are there things that we all on the committee know now that could be introduced as an interim recommendation before we finish this equity audit, which is taking months, which is, and the other things that we plan on having set up for future meetings too. Because do we need to wait till 18 months have passed to say
Right,
X?
right.
Probably not. I don't think it's a bad idea to necessarily have it be a standing committee that is, it is largely staff focused. It's about half staff overall. It's not a bad idea to rotate people on over time too. We've had, I want to say, 2 people drop off in the last couple of months that haven't been able to stay on. I'd love to have more students get onto it too. And I mean, I know we started this at a time when kids were not in the schools and we're not meeting with groups and we're not talking about this at all. We only had 3 students apply and they're all on it. So that would be a great thing too. I mean, I'm not opposed to this continuing to exist if it's doing good work. But as it's worded right now, it wouldn't. But maybe that's a great idea. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, I don't think there was actually a definitive midnight to the committee.
No.
It was more generalized, and I'm supportive of having this committee as long as the need exists in Waunakee, you know, and so it's just a thought for going forward, something the committee may want to reflect on a little bit and to give a sense of vision. Again, looking at some of the things they're doing, the audits, I mean, I can see how time consuming that is, and then analyzing all that stuff, so it's.
But the energy, you know, and I haven't seen every meeting, but I've tuned into a lot of them. There's so much energy that you have created. I mean, it's really a phenomenal thing. But Mike, also with you exiting the board, I think as, you know, with your leadership and as a board, we need to look at the leadership of this committee also. And might you want to stay on just for your own interest as a community member? But, you know, those are things I think we need to tackle in the next 2 months.
Well, I intentionally, the very first thing the committee did was elect a co-chair, because when we did that, I knew I wasn't going to be running.
Oh, okay.
I didn't tell anybody that at the time, but that was the purpose.
you.
So,
What's
Are
that?
you the co-chair?
No, Joel is.
Oh, Joel is.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm on the committee, but I haven't been able to make a lot of the meetings. And, you know, I think they're doing a great job. And because of the longevity question with this, and people are so involved in it, that they're really sort of setting a base and a foundation, and that has taken a while.
Yeah.
And I've said it a couple times, I said, they're going to come up with some action items soon. They're just trying to find a base and find their voice within. And when you have a group of 20 people on a Zoom call, there's a lot of opinions and stuff like that, good opinions, but it takes a while. So, but I think they're getting there.
But I think eventually we got to come up with a purpose for this and a direction for this community. You know, what problems are we trying to solve?
that's a good way to put it. I mean, if I had to distill it down to like one sentence, is that there are, we don't know what we don't know, and we're kind of seeking out the good and the bad. Like if we can come up with 10 great things to tell the community that we're doing, that administration and staff have been doing for years, and we need to be lauded for, then we'll say that. If we find things we need to fix, we're going to fix them before they blow into problems. That's the overall goal.
I think it's accurate to say right now, you're going through a needs assessment process that's pretty in-depth, and given that it's done on Zoom and a few other things, it's taken longer than being a bit drawn out. And so some of the actionable items, I'm hoping, will be informed out of the outcomes of the needs assessment.
When you look at this committee, you know, to your point, everybody on the staff kind of knows what we're doing, theoretically. You know, should we have, you know, more staff involvement in this, similar to like we have with all of the other committees, so that, you know, you get the information that you need to make assessments?
Maybe. I mean, we set it up to have kind of an ambiguous, indeterminate amount of members, and I wasn't entirely sure of how many people we were going to have apply for it. And we set it up that it would have more than a dozen but less than 25, and we got 71 applicants. And virtually every single person who applied was qualified and really wanted to do it, really cared to fill out an application and do it. I mean, the interest actually went beyond what I was expecting. So I am sure there are other people who would join on and do it. There are plenty of staff members who have come up afterwards saying that they wish they could have, but they couldn't for X, Y reason. I'm sure that having more people come and talk would be useful. I mean, part of what we did, I mean, I feel bad for Tim. He's sitting over there, and Tim ends up answering a lot of questions because he's one of the administrative designees for it, and he just ends up answering a lot of questions. But we have such a breadth of people who are on staff in various places, like we have someone from every single building, I think. We have people who are in spec ed, people who are working with different specific communities, like reading specialists, school psychology.
I'm just saying, from a structural standpoint, to get you the information and set the agendas to support this. You know, the way we have the HR committee, the goals committee, we get, you know, staff that is dedicated to these different committees, and by doing that, you know, it helps bring the information forward that you know, you've got people on the committee, and you know, they don't really know the intricacies of how this district is working. You know, would that help to support and solidify some of the work that you're doing?
I think it would. I mean, once we get through this equity audit process, I think that's the next step. Like, we haven't had a meeting where we've had, you know, Brian from HR come in and talk about district hiring practices to ensure that there's a diversified workforce. I think we can probably assume that that's an issue that the district cares about and that it wants to focus on. Is there an actual program or a policy to push for it? Not that I know of. But Brian could probably come in and talk to the committee for 20 minutes about what we do in that regard. That's information that we could have in a specific meeting that's focused just on that issue. We haven't done that yet because we haven't answered a bunch of other questions first.
I do think the makeup of the committee as we have is one of the strengths is that a lot of times internally we think we know, but we don't know how it's being perceived beyond ourselves. And so to have the community voice, to have the student voice, to be able to look at the system and say, well, that's maybe the intention, but this is the reception. The committee has really set up wonderfully to do that, and so I think that part's a very strong positive.
I like how you phrased it. You don't know what you don't know. And it's true. I mean, and I think you need outsiders to help you figure out what you're not doing.
Any other comments? Then we'll move on to the budget committee.
Okay, do you want to take this, or do you want me to?
Sure, I'll start and kind of fill in. You know, as Randy pointed out here, you know, we asked Randy to start framing the priorities, you know, a document for priorities and how we spend our money. going forward, where do we want to place it? And, we define, these different areas as was pointed out in before. And one of the things I think is, as we said earlier, is we got to start looking longer term than 1 year at a time, because some of these programs go over 1 or 2 years, 3 years, and if we start looking at them now, we're starting to set the future vision, for the community. One of the things we asked is start using Forecast 5, give us better solidify it, better or more information out of Forecast 5 on where we are. One of the things we talked about, we always hear that teachers want to know what they're going to make, early in the budget cycle. We talked about potentially looking at that so that we can put the funding into the budget, and it's going to be a shift from what we've been doing, because what we've always done, at least since I've been on the board, is in November, December, we reconcile our budget and find some different funding that we may not have utilized, and then we try to compensate teachers in that respect. If we go the way we talked about it, the budget committee, those budget reconciliations would go to programming and so forth that we need to, or that we feel that we need to move the program forward. We reviewed, one of the drafts of the budget, and we're also looking at getting requests from the different groups on where their priorities are. Any other comments?
I can just take a second on this document and give you a little bit of additional background from what Jack said and what I said earlier. The bullet points here are very similar to what you normally would see Steve put in the annual meeting presentation. They're very high level as far as kind of what our direction was with our budget. Certainly working around our strategic plan, looking at resources that move initiatives forward, that support our staff, and that looking at how we can bring forth staff and programs that meet the needs of all of our diverse learners. Those are pretty broad. What we tried to do this year was try to take a little bit more of a specific look at it. I broke it out into 3 different areas, and I equate this to when I was a curriculum director a number of years ago, and we used to do building goals. This is 20 years ago. It was you wrote your district goals based off of solely curricular related objectives, but it didn't take into account the other multiple faceted pieces that it takes to operate a school district. So this is kind of similarly phased in that when you look at your financial priorities, they have to hit a few different areas. They just can't hit one. Because traditionally, if you just look at it from an instructional standpoint, it's really these budget requests. Now, I don't have them listed out here, but if you remember back during our retreats in the past, and usually during our first draft of the budget, Steve would show you a list about this long on a single spaced on a spreadsheet. And it's really a visionary document from our administrative team and members from it could be curriculum, it could be student services, it could be Brian at the high school, of where are things that they see that could help move programs forward. I have a list of those sitting on my desk right now, or a packet of those. That's this one item. So I think what we talked about, and I know, Joan, you brought it up at the budget committee, was wanting to look at a broader vision of how we move some stuff forward. Some of it, but not all of it, probably fits in the programmatic part 2, which are some of the budget requests that start to get into where do we want to go. But the things we have to look at are also larger than that. So starting off from a financial standpoint, As we're coming out of COVID, I just threw out there a timeline that between now and 22, 23, we want to make sure that we are addressing the lingering costs that are associated with things that have occurred this year, and make sure that dollars that we've shifted around within our different budget funds are put back into their original funds of where they are, so that we can continue to build forward at a sustainable level. So that's number one. Two is looking at some of our fund balance policies. This was a piece that we looked at when we were initially doing some refinancing a few years ago, and looking at just how we've broken up our funds between Fund 10 and Fund 41, and wanting to reconcile that so that it positions ourselves well with Moody's and other bond rating institutions. And then also looking at our $2.1 million referendum that we have for 5 years, and putting a plan together with regards to that, and how we're going to utilize those in year 2, 3, 4, and 5. Programmatically, I've already talked a little bit about the budget requests. And tonight I'm going to have a request in front of you that we are really just informing the board, and also looking for your endorsement to move forward with planning and putting into place a program for post-COVID for those kids and families that have found value in remote learning. It's a piece we have in place, but it's a place that I think we have room for growth and things we've learned this year, and I think it's a piece that we need to focus on. Strategically, as Jack had already said, from a staffing and recruitment and retention perspective, taking a look at our compensation, utilizing the data that we have available to us. We've talked about at our retreat, and Annie has put forth some requests to me with regards to how we could look at really formally branding pieces within our district. And then the last two here are looking at things that are strategic from a referendum facilities planning perspective, and then also keeping up with some of the work that we have on facility maintenance. So you have everything from branding to facility maintenance to budget areas that deal with this fiscal sense, and then budget requests that deal with programmatic aspects that we want to see as part of our vision moving forward. So that's kind of where this was built from, and where and the spirit of where it was presented. I would see each of these then being further built out with more detail as far as what they look like. So this is just kind of the, per se, the cover that goes to a more detailed plan. And then I see this being also a place that we can start some of the conversations going into the goals committee. And I think it would be probably helpful to not only hear from the goals committee and the board as far as where you want to go once we get to that point, but also sharing the high level pieces of what some of these requests are, so you can see some of the vision that our team has as we're looking forward. So with that, I'd entertain any questions that you have with regards to any of that.
Do you think there'd be a value in some of these priorities stating whether they're a long-term sustainable funding issue versus a short-term one-time funding issue?
Yeah.
Like, for example, obviously the 2 to 5 year plan,
Yeah.
the reestablishing the budgets due to COVID would be short-term, while the programmatic priorities would obviously have to be a sustainable funding.
Correct, right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the plan that has to come out from each of these. I mean, you might be able to, for example, take some of the dollars that we have, what did I do here? That we have associated with some of the referendum pieces. If you're looking at putting those into some one-time costs, they may be aligned well with some of the things we have in our facility maintenance. They wouldn't be probably a good place to put into a compensation plan because that's ongoing. So definitely, I think that's part of some of the strategy we have to have in the details, is identifying what we want to do and what the funding stream is for some of them. I also see some of these as multiple year goals that probably are going to sustain for a number of years moving forward.
I think if we start using, again, a strategy like this when we go into the retreat, this along with the goals can be the basis for the agenda as we start moving forward. As Joan had indicated, these are budgetary, and goals are, you know, a lot more than just budget.
I think you have a couple options. One is this could be a starting point for a discussion that we have with the goals committee. It could also be a piece that the board could choose to kind of adopt these as a draft moving forward that we will then continue to build off of. And it certainly would then also serve as a guide to further development of the budget and also serve as a complement to any other work we do within the goals committee.
So you'd like a motion on this?
That would at least adopt this so we can continue that process moving
I'll
forward.
move that we adopt this as a guideline for moving forward with the budget.
I'll second
Second.
that. So this moves
Judy,
then
which
to
button?
goals.
Judy.
Judy?
Judy.
Yeah, and I think that's a good clarification. I would like to start, the work with the budget is starting now. So I'd like to use this as a framework to continue to build some of those budgetary pieces. But I think it is a complementary piece that also then can help inform some of the pieces within goals. So it doesn't trump the idea of having things at the goals committee not being able to be part of this. It's just part of that dialogue.
I think what it starts to do is put parameters around things. You know, because, you know, you can come up with a great grandiose vision, but if we can't pay for it, the vision, we can't execute.
Any further questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Then we'll move on to our Medical Advisory Ad Hoc Committee minutes, which was last week. For those who weren't present, I really found the part on what a vaccination means was probably the most interesting part of the meeting, and what it doesn't mean. You want to go over already, or?
I think one of the things, you know, reading through, you know, some of the stuff out of the HR, why we set up the medical advisory committee, you know, I think in my mind, one of the reasons we set it up is so that we could vet out the policies and so forth that and procedures that were being pushed forward or put forth by the administration to make sure that we didn't miss anything. I don't think it was ever really set up as a, they wanted to make recommendations to the board, but the board still has to vote and use their judgment on moving things forward.
I mean, that's a question I've received a number of times. The purpose, the way our medical advisory committee works right now is it's absolutely a voice to help us with guidance through policies, procedures, and decisions that we're making. So, for example, one of the things we talked about was the UW has an antigen test that they are providing to some school districts to test symptomatic individuals. And so we had a conversation of the pros and cons of utilizing that, and through that dialogue, it led us to really decide not to go in that direction. So I think the discussions that we have around those type of topics are really valuable, and then just providing them an update on how our processes are going and if they have any suggestions moving forward. We talked about the antigen testing, we talked about lunch, we talked about feedback on mental health. Those are some of the high-level pieces that we discussed, and then also our data, which I'll talk about. I won't touch on that right now, but we'll dive into that in a little bit.
And I just want to point out the obvious to give credit that, Randy, you could be talking to Dr. Potoff and Dr. Anderson and doing all this on the side in your office and not be doing this in public.
That's right.
You could have a Zoom call with all these people if this wasn't organized by the board to be doing all this anyway. You're doing it for the purpose of being transparent so people can see that you're actually having those conversations.
Right. I mean, I think it's been very good to have that, the transparency around that, so that we can show that there's a lot of really good things coming out of there, and I think it's also been a piece that I've had some parents who've contacted me with questions they've had who've said, can you pose this question? And so there's been a few of those where I've been able to take some of the themes and bring some of those forward as well.
And I don't think we can thank the medical people who've been on that committee enough for spending the time and effort that they're doing, because I know at least a couple of them are probably being tapped by everybody under the sun to help them figure this out. I mean, SSM Health here in town, they know what's happening in the community. They're treating the community, so it's great to have them there with Dr. Random and of course Potoff and our school counselors and everything. It's been good to be able to cover the whole gamut. And I know everybody's putting in a lot of time just helping us do that. If there's no other questions on the medical committee, then we will move to the co-curricular committee.
So we had our last co-curricular meeting on Thursday, just last Thursday, and it was basically to get an update on how winter sports had been going, and then also, sort of put a plan together on our sports that moved from fall to spring, and then our upcoming spring sports as well. Aaron brought up some good information regarding student athlete academic success, and actually participation numbers as well. And if I remember right, participation numbers were about the same?
Yeah, we held steady in regards to participation with the sports that we did offer. And yeah, it's not a causal relationship. That's always been strongly correlated, academic success with activities. And that's even in this unique situation that's shown through. Our grades are still just as strong. Our GPAs are as strong as they have been in the past. So.
Yeah, and just to take a real high-level look, I mean, we looked at this in more depth at the committee level, but in your packet, you'll find a report that talks about participation rates by grade level. So Aaron has pulled those pieces together, talks about which activities took place in the fall, what's happened in the winter, number of participants, and number of kids who have been participating. We took a look at just performance from an academic standpoint and the GPA. Looking at these from previous years, a few were up, a few were a little down, but generally I think they're really trending in the same place. I think when I look back, it was either a year or two, our range was like a 2.95 to like a 3.8, generally the same kind of range that we're dealing with right here. And then he's also included a few things as far as just participation numbers. So you definitely see that the programs that we've offered have had a lot of kids involved, and I think that's been a positive thing, and appreciate the support of the board as those have moved forward.
So, and then Randy and Aaron invited the coaches to help us answer some of the questions regarding how things have been going, but also planning for the upcoming. So we had a good long discussion regarding discussion plan for fall and spring, and then a new order came out, and we sort of put that hour and a half in the truck.
Well, you use that in a month.
Well,
Maybe
I
next
think
week.
Randy said it was coming out on Wednesday, but.
It came out early. I was glad it came out early. It's timely, so that was fun. Let me just take a minute to kind of, in your packet, you'll see that on Friday I just updated the board notes with really what the recommendation was coming out of the committee. At that point, it was supporting our sports to continue to participate out of the county, following the orders that were in place, following masking pieces, etc. I did have an inkling to know that there in the subsequent order number 13, that there would be changes to co-curriculars. I just didn't know what they were. And late this morning, the order was released. So what I emailed that off to you earlier today, so it should be in your email box. And then I'm going to speak real highly as far as what it really is stating. The order really had a few changes that impacted schools. One of them was, this takes a look at gathering limits indoors and outdoors. That's different than classrooms. So that's kind of school board meeting is not really a good example because it's a government meeting that's not held under those auspices. But if we were some other sort of a meeting happening at the high school, we have gathering limits. And you can see that they've changed theirs from whether you have food or you don't have food. There's different levels of people you can have in a building, ranging from 25 up to 50 or 100. Outdoor limits up to 100, and potentially without food up to 150. When you start looking at athletics, they really gave a lot of parameters, which is a piece that I was happy to see, because as we've shared in the past, we feel that operating our programs with our staff and in our facilities is the safest place we can do them. So I think what this order has provided us is the opportunity to do that. So they took some of the recommendations that were coming out of the National Association that really looks at high school athletics and moving away from some of these tiered approaches to low, medium, and high sports, and has really taken and put them together and said that we are able to compete within the county. We are also able to practice within the county, and they also further define the distancing requirements for when that has to occur. And they also updated, which I was pleased to see, the masking requirements as far as what the minimal standard is. I feel that the standard that they've put out there is now in line more with what we've been enforcing all along, so I think that's positive. But it's going to allow really our activities as we move forward, particularly the ones that are taking place outside, to be able to practice and be able to compete within home events as well as away. So I think that's really positive. So the recommendations we had for tonight are a bit negated because what's been allowed by public health is moving beyond that, and I think it's actually in a position where it allows us then to move forward, work with our coaches. I still see us putting safety plans in place. I still see us working through that administratively, so it's not just open it up and everything's back to normal. We'll still require that we have a plan in place for how we mitigate risk, but I think everything from football, lacrosse, baseball, softball, etc. can all participate as they're moving forward. Timeline is, I've laid out, or Aaron's included a timeline within your board packet that just shows that we have activities for our, if you recall, we have those fall to spring sports. Some of them are starting in late February, early March, and then we also have our traditional spring sports that are happening after those other ones are complete. So we actually have a pretty solid state of affairs that are happening in the athletics world moving forward. Not a very large gap between winter and the fall to spring sports. And the order that's out today gives us latitude to be able to work with our coaches and our athletes. So, and Aaron, you've been involved with some of the public health pieces, have gotten many of the updates. Anything you would have to add to that? I mean, the specifics will work out with individual coaches and programs, but generally any other things to add to what I've already overviewed?
I guess I'll just touch on two parts. The new order does require masking for outdoor sporting events, meaning while they're competing. If they can't physically distance at 6 feet, they would have to be masked. And then Randy mentioned the health plans or the safety plans will still be in. That's a piece of the order, so that is required in the order. And my coaching staffs and I will be working on that. We're meeting on Thursday. Thursday afternoon, we have the Dane County ADs have a meeting with public health. Basically, it's just a Q&A session. And then I'll be meeting with my coaches and we'll start developing those safety plans to be shared with, I think it's the COVID group, which kind of Kurt and Brian Havarski are kind of in charge of. So, yeah.
I mean, I would say the only thing that we probably talked about at the committee that really wasn't addressed fully here would be particularly as we are traveling to other places to compete and looking at just what's happening with spectator size. I think that was a concern that came out of the committee as far as wanting us to be proactive in different levels of mitigation and also minimizing what those sizes are. I think that is still really the general sense that I receive, and I know that Aaron has shared with me is about what our experience has been as we've been traveling for things this fall and this winter. But that would definitely be a part that we would continue to work with. Obviously, any of the teams coming here, we have very specific regulations that may not even allow spectators, depending on the venue and the number of students we have participating. And then certainly as we were traveling, we will continue to work to minimize those spectator pieces. So that's probably the one thing that the order doesn't specifically speak to that we discussed at the committee level.
So I guess as an example, we had talked about today, so if a home football game in Dane County, limited to 100 people, so be 50-50 possibly on either sideline, coaches don't count, referees don't count, stuff like that. That's it.
You're done.
That's 100 people, so there's no room for spectators or anything like that, you know, in that area. Where opposed to some other sports, you know, there may be room if you have soccer that brings the two teams to 25 and we're limiting at 100. So some of the question was, do we want to allow spectators at the ones that we can put them in? Or do we not want to, or do we might talk about possibly putting a policy where we limit all spectators?
The numbers are pretty minimal. I mean, so there's pretty tight caps on them, but it's still a piece that, because your players count towards the number. So even if you had a soccer game and you had X number of people on both sides, they count towards the group number plus your spectators, so it's going to limit what you have. But you could create discrepancies between one sport being able to have spectators and others not, just based on the venue and the number of participants.
So we also talked about streaming off home events as well, as a benefit too.
Which is a piece they've already been, I know that Aaron and Annie have been working on that and have plans for how we can do it.
Part of that discussion though too was about the away games, if they're out of the county, about the fact that you saw the committees in number 3. We think if we're going to be limiting spectators here for a health reason, then if we go out of county, we should be expecting that too.
Right.
At least on, that we don't compete with team, you don't compete if the school sits there and says no limits.
Right.
That puts our high school students at risk, and then we bring them back in, and that puts the high school education at risk.
I guess what I would say is it probably changes our motion here tonight. I think it's definitely supporting the movement forward with our athletic programs, lining it up with obviously the work that's coming out of public health, but also the piece that's probably not covered unless we act on it is just it's really an active piece for Aaron as he's setting up the programs at the other schools out of county, that we do have that work that helps to limit some of the spectator pieces of that. Doesn't mean you have to eliminate it, but it means there has to be a plan to limit those to do it as safe as possible. And I think what you saw, Aaron, was from previous activities this winter, it was the visiting team either got no participants because they were limiting it from that respect, or they just didn't have spectators at all. I don't know if you've had any of our groups that have participated where it's just an open gate as usual.
No, there's been no general admission type sporting events like in past years. I would say most common is no visiting fans is the most common situation. When visiting fans are allowed, it is typically 2 fans per team member. So I'm on the basketball team, my mom and dad are able to come, and we send a list of those names ahead to the other school. And so when they would show up, they check in under my name, they get checked off, and that's it. So it's been fairly controlled. Like I said, most common is no visiting spectators, and then after that it's typically 2. If they're allowing visiting spectators, it's limited to 2 per team member.
But usually before you're traveling, there's always I've seen some of the documents you've shared with me, the agreements between the schools, what their rules are as they come, as detailed as where your bus parks,
Yep.
what your rules are in masking, where you enter, all of the different protocols.
Would it make sense to make a motion to say that we allow the fall to spring and normal spring sports to have their schedule according to WIAA and Dane County, and any team that travels out may not take more than 2 spectators per student? That way, if the home school makes it tougher, fine, we're tougher, but it will never exceed that. Because I'm guessing as Dane County starts to open things up more, other counties are and other schools will too. But if we wanted to keep that limit, we have to say it, otherwise I can almost guarantee within a month, guess what's going to happen.
So you want to limit our fans that are traveling to a maximum of 2 per kid? Is that what you're saying?
Right. If that's what we think is reasonable.
Is that what we're doing now?
We're just we as a school aren't limiting the spectators at other places. We're just going with what that whole school, whatever their limitations are. Yeah, we haven't ever, like, if a school's told us 2, we've said 2. We haven't ever reduced it. We haven't had any other.
What are you seeing right now? It's basically when you're going to these different events, are there 2 spectators generally?
So,
Does everybody have?
I would say the
open
typical situation for visiting fans is no visiting spectators. That's the most common. That only home spectators are allowed, and those are still even limited to anywhere from 2 to 4 per home fan. So our boys basketball team went to Janesville last week. None of our parents were able to go. They had to watch it on the live stream. You know, but let's say this Friday they're playing Belleville, and there will be 2 per player at that game from each the home and the away teams.
We're talking with other ADs that will be possibly playing.
Yeah.
Is that sort of what people are thinking as well?
I would say at our last athletic directors meeting with the Badger Conference, that's what people were thinking. We had another one actually on Wednesday, where I'm sure we'll have some updates to that. But generally speaking, those schools have been really good about really limiting fans, mostly because they still, even if their county doesn't have maybe as stiff regulations as Dane County does, their schools still have regulations that they have to follow. And so you'll go to those high school games, and you'll see in the bleachers that they'll have axed out every 6 feet where you can sit. For example, at Waukesha South, last Friday, we were hosting the boys sectional swim meet there, and he had their AD had already put stickers on every 6 feet apart, and it said sit here. They had that throughout the whole, and we were again only allowed 2 fans per swimmer. So at that meet, and that was actually the same at the state meet the following Saturday in the same pool. So they've been fairly stringent on those type of situations.
I would submit that we don't put any more restrictions,
I would agree.
you know.
I'm comfortable with what we're doing.
Let me ask a question. If a school in a month and a half to 2 months from now decides that they have a football game there, and they decide to just open it up because the numbers are getting better, things are better, whatever, or parent pressure like we've seen, and they decide to just open the whole stadium up, would you be comfortable with the football team from Waunakee going with full unrestricted numbers?
Dave, who's going to police that? That's my concern. Do you expect Aaron to police the 2 people per athlete? Who's the policeman?
I'm not saying there has to be a
So are you
policeman.
saying they forfeit it if that happens?
No, I say you don't play a team where their
But
school
what,
is
but
saying
you're
that
saying
that's
it
what
changes
they're
a
doing.
month and a half now. They've already scheduled them under this set of rules. And then a month and a half later, they change it. We don't have control over that. So then I guess the question is then what?
That's what I'm saying. Are you comfortable that if that occurs, that you're saying that that's fine? In which case, you're right, you shouldn't have a rule like that.
I
Personally,
would say yes, because what I'm hearing is that you're signing agreements with these people up front before you go there, so you know what you're getting into.
Yes. Yes,
So-
I would say
so-
that, yeah.
So it's not like they can just open it up before you get there, because you've already agreed that these are the rules.
Yeah, well, let me clarify something, Aaron, just to make sure we're all understanding. When we play out of the county, I think it's relatively standard that there's some level of agreement between the schools. And I think I've seen in some of the places where you've actually had it, it's actually a written piece that talks about kind of just understanding what those is that accurate with pretty much every one of our activities?
Yeah, so what'll happen is the host schools will, for the winter, since we're not really the host for anything because we're going everywhere else, Sauk Prairie say will send me what we just refer to as their COVID plans. And it will detail spectators, where they can stream, how many players are allowed in, if locker rooms if they're available or not available, what time we can actually show up, where we should be parking, what the flow into the building and out of the building will be. And so they'll detail through each of those plans, and before we've really gone in and signed the contract in most cases. I would say I haven't seen a lot of changes in those cases. And last Friday we did have a meeting talking with some of the other schools that are offering the alternate fall, and even Milton, Fort Atkinson, who are outside of Dane County, said in that meeting they're still planning to limit, even at their outdoor events, the number of spectators that would be allowed in the alternate fall soccer and football games in their facility. So, Dave, it could change, I guess, but I mean that's those AD's position as of Friday morning, and that's kind of the information I have to work off of at this point.
I mean, I think just like we have pressure to fully open our schools. Some parents contact us and say, 5 day a week, full-time in-person, why aren't you doing it today? Every community is getting that pressure. As the fall sports come up, and you got to say, football is a big sport. It has a lot of people on the field. It's going to want to have a lot of people in the stands. There's going to be community pressure. If our coach or AD or anyone gets a contract put in front of them saying no limits on spectators, based on right now, we're saying go ahead and sign it if you feel like it. And yet we're telling that we're limiting our students in school. We're limiting our students in the classroom because of concerns about this. I don't understand why we're saying that we feel 2 spectator limit is reasonable, but if some other school walks in with a contract, we're going to leave it on the AD and on the coach to decide to sign that contract or not, because we're saying, well, that's up to them.
I may be wrong, David. Isn't the state emergency controlling how many people can be outdoors and indoors as well as masks?
No.
They aren't?
No. There's a state mask order,
but
there's
there's also limitations to how many people can be in a restaurant.
County by county.
Outside seating, inside seating too. That's not just Dane County.
Aaron, let me ask you another question that might help with Dave's piece. I think what the spirit of what we're trying to talk about is that you're wanting to be able to have the kids participate, be able to travel, but wanting to make sure that we have some controls on what those things are in the stands. Now, whether that's 0, 2, 4, we're trying to put a number to it. I mean, and some of that is, my position would be that administratively we can work through that, understanding that the provision that the board is looking for is that you don't have just the open gates, everybody comes and you got 3,000 people at a DeForest Waunakee game.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. And I can guarantee you that's not going to happen talking to my colleagues. But I think that's the fear, is that could that happen somewhere, and trying to give some assurance to the board that that's not something we're going to participate in, and that we will work with any of our colleague districts to make sure that we have some limitations on spectators. I mean, is that an accurate statement from what you spoke to the other ADs about, that everybody is looking at some level of capacity and limiting spectators, and at this point there's not this view that even in the next month we're going to open this up wider?
Yes. Yeah, I don't see no AD in our conversations, whether it's the full Badger Conference or just this subset that are in the alternate fall, has mentioned anything about unlimited or just general admission events.
And I think we could commit, if somebody said there's no limit on this for, that would be an event that then we would have to look at not doing.
Yeah, we would definitely have to have that conversation and bring it to that athletic director. Like, here's the concerns we have, and here's how we can address it.
So how many of these games are now going to be switched to a home game? What do you think? Because those we don't have to worry about, right?
That's right. Well, I guess that's...
We just say no pay.
That's kind of somewhat difficult to just generalize over all the sports. But yeah, we're looking, we had kind of planned whether it was the alternate fall or the spring to being on the road because we didn't know where we were going to be in Dane County. Right? Just as I was trying to map things out. But with the turf fields, the alternate fall schedule, with our turf soccer and our turf football fields, that allows us to host in conditions that other schools won't be able to. So we're probably flipping, I wouldn't say all of them, but a majority of them will be more than likely flipped to Waunakee to host within those Dane County regs and those group size limitations. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to make it.
So I would, do you need a motion on this, or what?
I think there should be, so that, well, I don't think I need anything on the public health orders, but if you want anything that specifically articulates anything else you want us doing with travel, and I think keeping it so that we have some ability to work through this administratively with our colleagues in the other districts, that's what I'd like the latitude to be able to do.
I would make a motion to give the administration to use best judgment to participate in away games and competitions.
Second.
Do you want to take a voice vote on that, Dave, or is this?
Sure. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, hold it.
Wait.
Did anyone have any comments or
Yeah,
questions?
I have no idea what that means, just say give administration best judgment.
Well, at some point they have the judgment to enforce their, school policy. We can't sit there and do everything for them. So it's just like when they look at the COVID policies, we're not looking over every little COVID policy for them, but they have to also enforce that as well.
The way I would interpret what Jack said would be, if we're setting up a game in Sauk, and we're going to be going to Sauk, we're still going to go through all of our protocol pieces as far as what's allowed there, what are some of our expectations, looking at the pieces from what we expect of our student athletes, our coaches, WIAA rules, and if by chance a school says, we're not going to be limiting spectators, it's going to be wide open, gates are open, that would be one that we would state that we can't come under those circumstances and that we need to work with limiting some of those spectator pieces. I fully anticipate that's not going to be the case, but I think that's the concern I'm hearing from the board. So I would commit that would be a piece that if that were to occur, that we would be diligent to try to implement the spirit of what I think the board is asking. That's how I would read that line.
Do we want to do the motion that was recommended by the committee, which does not put a hard limit on it, but made a statement that it was a three-part motion made by Brian that stated the remaining athletic programs for fall to spring traditional spring sports can compete during their designated season, including travel outside of Dane County. That was part one. Part two, as a condition of these programs moving forward and competing, they will adhere to face covering requirements as outlined by Public Health and WIAA, and through collaboration between the athletic administration of competing schools, ensure that with or without a state mask order, we protect our students and operate our programs safely with regard to face coverings. And three, as a condition of these programs moving forward and competing, collaboration will take place between competing schools to minimize spectators And for example, winter sports have either a 2-person per athlete or more restrictive rules that don't allow. That's an example. That's not necessarily the wording. And the committee's not in favor of a competition that does not work to limit spectators. That's the motion that came out of the committee.
I think that probably all
I
still
think-
applies.
We have a motion that actually embraces the concept there.
Yes.
So I would suggest we vote on the current motion. If we want to put a motion to support that recommendation, that wouldn't really alter anything.
And the motion is exactly, what do you have written?
I give administration the ability to use best judgment in
Scheduling.
participating in away games, and I put it as far as spectators.
Basically, we're giving the administration use their best judgment to make sure that we don't get into a situation like you had indicated.
It's generally those 3 points, which those were written kind of with the ability for us to kind of work through those. That's how I read them.
Yep.
Now, that was written at a time when we were kind of accepting to move out of the county, when our county orders were different. Now this applies, the county orders apply here. I think that's good. This still applies as we travel.
Can I amend the vote to include this recommendation in the initial motion?
Second.
Okay.
So we're just voting on adding the 3 points to Jack's motion.
Right.
I just want to say one thing, and there's a really great example of this, and it's that I think Aaron really brought this up, is that there is, how do I word it? There are counties we're going to that unfortunately I think are reveling in ignorance in terms of how to deal with this. But we've already been in those counties, and I know the high school districts are really doing a great job, and I know that because the county I grew up in, the city I grew up in, and my dad works for auxiliary police there and was at the basketball game that one of our teams played them. So they're doing a great job, but they're surrounded by a bunch of other areas that are deliberately saying we're going to do the worst possible thing. So that's what I am trusting the administration's doing.
Right.
It terrifies me to think of the football grounds that I played on with that many people right now. And I think frankly that's what's going to happen. So.
I mean, and I know that, football's come up a bit. I mean, when we were at the co-curricular meeting, Pat was part of that conversation, and I think his conversation was his goal is to have kids play. And I think that's all of it. So if we have to limit and try to work through that, I think that's something we're comfortable doing. I think the motion gives us the latitude to work with our colleague districts to make sure that we do it in a manner that it meets the spirit of what the board is requesting.
Right. I really want kids to be able to play. I could not care any less about parents getting to watch them in person.
I think that was a strong part of the whole co-curriculum meeting. Was
Right.
making that point. So right now we have an amendment of the 3 points onto Jack's original motion. Just voting on whether to add the 3 points or not. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adding the 3 points, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Then, now we're back to the original motion. And I just want to clarify, part of my purpose here is to make sure it's not the administration's fault. I think we've had a lot of parents that have very strong views on how far we should be open or not be open. That's our fault, based on making the point. And I really would hate to see the administration getting blamed for things that they shouldn't be blamed for, because a lot of these ADs or superintendent, they're going to be working in this school district for a long time. We're all here for 3 years at a shot. And I just like to help them not have to be, you can call it the bad guy or whatever you want, but the idea that if a policy's set, that's our policy. And if the community wants to talk to us, I know I've been on many long phone calls, that's the flack we should take so that they can always continue to do their job.
So let's take a roll call vote on this.
Okay, so we now have Jack's motion as amended with the 3 points. Brant,
Aye.
Engelbertson,
Yay.
Henson,
Yes.
Heineman,
Yes.
Hetzel,
Yes.
Hafer,
Yes.
and Betcher, yes.
Thank you.
And that should end.
Yeah, we got,
Oh,
one more
we got the
consideration.
mountain biking.
Right. So we had a
Not
group,
forget mountain biking.
so we had a group that came in and to talk to us about starting a mountain bike club. I think Aaron knows a little bit more about it, so I'm going to turn it over to Aaron.
Well, I'm just gonna go through some of you have been on the board for a while, and probably wondering why it's, why it's coming up now, and not at a sort of the normal timeline. Typically, these approvals are done in October and November board meetings. That was, of course, right in the middle of the reopening of schools discussion, and kind of, we suspended the committee's sort of meetings at that time. So we just put it on pause until we had another co-curricular meeting. So this isn't somebody trying to jump the timeline or jump the line. This group brought it to us actually right before we shut down last spring. So this was why we were there. The mountain biking club, and I'll give John a second here too, and he can explain more about particulars of the club. What the committee recommended is we approve it for the time being as a Category C activity, to give it a chance to get its feet underneath it before sort of the more intense administrative oversight of the code, if they were to move over into the Category A, kicks in. But basically it would be similar to some other things that we do have, and where it's a club made up of middle school and high school age students. They would be practicing and participating in a mountain bike season in the fall. And really, I see it as an opportunity for us to capture some kids that don't necessarily have a connection to the school through activities. I think this is a unique population that's going to give them an attachment to the school, and not, and our other co-curriculars, whether they're clubs or sports, are not going to suffer because of it. We're not going to, we're not going to have a club lose membership because they're going to this new club. I think this is going to capture a unique set of students that haven't had that connection to the school. And so that's kind of why we were recommending, myself and Mr. Borowski were recommending it for approval to the co-curricular committee.
Let me add just a couple of things. I think when you take a look at the form that came forward, John's not asking for any compensation at this time for the club. They have the ability to do some fundraising if they need to. It's also students who are already competing in this. When you take a look at some of the, it's kind of a blend between a couple different clubs that we've seen or parallels. We have a fishing club, which is really kids who are very interested in fishing as a sport, and they're supported in that endeavor. We have an equestrian team, which is kind of more closely parallel to this, and that they were already competing and they really wanted an opportunity to have the pride of wearing Waunakee on their jersey. I see this as kind of a combination of the two, an interest that kids are able to participate. John shared with me they can be competitive or they can just be recreational within the club. And then as it gets established, we can determine if we want to move it up to a higher level piece within the co-curricular code where they can earn major letters, etc. at the high school. So from our perspective, I'm excited about being able to add it as an opportunity, and would open it up for any questions you have for Aaron, and John is here if there's any questions you may have for him.
I make the motion to accept the club.
Second.
Judy?
Any discussion? I think Judy's really saying it much faster. The only thing I want to add is that I have it on my list in June or July to make a motion to move it to Category A, based on everything else going well, mainly because so the seniors who are in it can letter in it this year. Otherwise, if it stays C, they won't be able to, and it is a competitive sport, so.
We had approximately 9 students come up in support of this program the other day. So.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, now we finish co-curriculars, which takes us to report on return of grades 5 through 12.
I'm just going to take just a few minutes here to report on the return of our students to school. First of all, very exciting. Being able to be there on the first days when our kids are walking back in through the building. I give absolute credit to that, to our administrative team. You know, Brian's here representing the high school, Jeff Keenis, Jim Momartz, all of the assistants, all of the teachers and staff for making that piece possible. You heard from the girls earlier on when they were given their student council report that it was a positive experience for them. I could see that just seeing the kids as they came through the school. The feeling I received, as particular as you look at the middle school, high school, is that our students and staff are as safe from a COVID incident at our middle school and high school as they are at any of our elementaries. I feel very strongly that the protocols, the processes we've put in place and that our staff have embraced and our students are following are tops, and I can't praise them enough for doing that. So it's exciting to get our students back, and we'll continue to be moving forward and looking at where we're at. I did put in front of every board member tonight just an update on where we're at with all of our COVID numbers. Just at a very high level, you're going to see that we are doing extremely well. Kurt has continued to put together all of our data on a daily basis. And when you look over our total positivity rates from the end of January through now, you're looking at single digits every day. Our burden rate that we have on a 14-day model off of 100,000 is 11.78. I don't think we've been that low since probably early fall, late summer. So I mean, this is really great news to really see that we're trending there, and we're hoping that all of the efforts that community, families, everybody is putting forth will help to continue that, and particularly as we get more people vaccinated in the coming weeks and months. A few things that I know have come up with regards to conversations I've had with parents is particularly what are some of the things that you see coming next. There's quite a bit of chatter about 3 feet social distancing versus 6 feet social distancing. That's based on some studies that have happened around the country and different discussions around what's the appropriate distancing in order for mitigation and of disease within a school setting. Right now, the CDC, Wisconsin DHS, and Public Health have maintained the 6 feet. At a point in time where they would ever shift that, that's a piece that we are evaluating right now to see how that would impact us as a school district. That's a piece that all of our schools are trying to be proactive and taking a look at to see so that if that occurs, that we're able to be responsive to it. A few other questions and things that I talked about, I believe, last month as we approved bringing all of our students back into hybrid we have is there a point where we will consider Wednesdays, particularly at the secondary level? And then also where are we at with lunch? I mean, those are 2 topics that we have put some, as we've returned our students, we've started administratively to have some conversations around those. I would say right now our Wednesdays, and I think, and Brian and Tim, you're here, you can correct me if I'm wrong, between now and the end of the school year, I think all of our Wednesdays are utilized except for 4. So we either have a few 4-day weeks that we don't have any Wednesdays that we're using in the same way that we're utilizing those as instruction days. And many of our other Wednesdays we're utilizing for assessment, ACT, etc. So we're not taking time out of the instructional day on those Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, utilizing the Wednesdays more productively from that. So between now and the second week in June, we have 4 open Wednesdays. So we'll continue to evaluate those pieces, but I like the plan for how we can utilize that to maximize instruction on the other days. Lunch is also a piece we're taking a look at those levels. As far as if we were to ever expand out the length of our day and then include a lunch piece, some things we are looking at are space, distancing, line logistics, and then how we would do food. So those are pieces that we've had a few meetings on, And I anticipate that as we come back here next month, we'll be able to provide you with an update on what some of the next steps may be, and particularly if our COVID numbers continue, if there's any flexibility from public health, what those may mean for us as well. I guess I wanted to articulate that we are having those discussions. We are putting some plans in place in order to see if we can answer the questions and provide you with greater insight next month. That's generally what my update is, because there's other pieces that I think are more pertinent to helping us understand what's going on in our schools, and that's really a presentation by Amy and Tim this evening. One of the things we've talked about here for a number of months is how are students doing from an academic standpoint, what's happening with curriculum, questions we've had about how we go about teaching, particularly when you have different schedules within the day. So I've asked Tim and Amy to put together a piece that talks a bit about the curriculum design and then also how our students are performing through the first semester. So appreciate Amy starting off, and then we'll kick it over to Tim, and hope this helps to answer some of those questions.
All right, thanks Randy. Thanks for driving for me, Rebecca. So I'll start with the first slide. And this is really just a quick overview about 4K. So in 4K, we have been operating just as we have in the past, with just two main differences. So our program is Monday through Friday, the typical schedule, same number of hours face-to-face. But we do have 3 fully remote classes this year, and those account for 13% of our student population. And then we have been operating under a student cap from Public Health, Madison-Dane County, of 15. And so that means that we've had smaller class sizes than usual. We usually have a minimum of 10, up to 20, depending on the classroom. But this year we have some lower class sizes, 8 through 15. So in the order that was just released today, that's going to go into effect on Wednesday, they have lifted that cap. So that won't really mean that we will adjust our current classes, but if a remote student wants to go into face-to-face at quarter, or if we have new students, we can now exceed that 15 student limit. Then I just wanted to point out, for those of you who have been on the board for a while, you might remember that last year we had an enrollment dip that we weren't really sure what the reason was, if that was going to be a trend or not. And we have rebounded. Our numbers are almost exactly what they were 2 years ago. So we have not seen an enrollment decline in 4K. So this slide shows a little bit about our current third quarter enrollment for K through 6, just so you can get an idea of how many families are still in the fully remote option. So we have 31% of our students in fully remote, and then 69% in our split day, and that's over K through 6. So now I want to talk a little bit about kind of how the teams are approaching their planning and then their delivery of instruction. So we obviously have a strong professional learning community PLC model. I know you as board members have heard about that over the years. But this year at the K through 4 level, we are able to meet weekly with teachers from all 3 buildings. And so that's been something that has really allowed us to stay really well aligned and in sync in terms of our curriculum. So remote and hybrid teachers plan together, and again, those are across the 3 buildings at the K4 level. But of course, at the intermediate level or specialist level, they also plan together. But it's been really powerful for the teachers from all 3 buildings to collaborate. Now when they're meeting together, they're talking about their current units and what is really essential and how they're going to assess the student progress. They also talk about what part of the lesson and what part of the unit is best for asynchronous or live format, and then what part of a lesson might be better for kind of asynchronous, recorded or practice. So I have a couple of examples just so you can kind of get a flavor of what this looks like. at the PLC. So this is a writing example. So this is grade level's whole year worth of writing. And so we have information from our publisher, the Center for the Collaborative Classroom, and they have suggested within each unit what are the essential skills, and then also what order did they suggest us teaching these units so that we prioritize more essential content earlier in the year and less essential later in the year, in case our model would require us to make some decisions about units to eliminate. So that's a little bit about how we approach kind of a whole year's worth of curriculum. The next example is a math example, just for one discrete unit. And so Everyday Math has provided us with some guidance about what sorts of activities we should prioritize. And then also this is a resource that we have been using for years, so teachers know very well what is really the essential piece and what in the past students haven't really needed as much practice in. And then after we determine kind of what the essential pieces are and what kind of the optional pieces would be, we make a decision about what would be that live or synchronous teaching and then what we would move to be kind of the asynchronous or practice. So this next slide kind of shows, at a glance, when we are looking at a unit and kind of unpacking that, we look at the whole day and we think, what part of this unit is best suited for the live or synchronous teaching? So a lot of times that is our small group lessons. It's kind of direct teaching of a standard, maybe demonstration or modeling. And then we look at what sorts of things that we would normally do during the school day would be appropriate for the asynchronous time of the day. So a lot of times that's going to be independent practice. So teachers will have choice boards with different practice options. It will be time just to read and write and practice those phonics skills. Or for math, practice their facts, maybe complete their math box worksheet, or maybe do some digital game practice. And then also during the asynchronous time, we might see kind of what we would call like a flipped lesson. So maybe the teacher would record a demonstration or maybe reading aloud of a mentor text, and they would want the students to watch that kind of before their next in-person or live lesson. So that kind of just gives an overview about how we approach kind of the lesson planning. So next I want to talk a little bit about assessments, and I know I've shared this with the curriculum committee, but I don't think I've talked to the whole board about this, but because of our remote and hybrid models, some of the authors of assessments have changed the administration guidelines or protocols. So our assessment calendar doesn't quite look the way that it has in the past. So the first English Language Arts assessment there, the PALS, the Phonological Awareness Literacy Screener, we use that in 4K through 2. And they developed some protocols for remote administration. So we were able to give that assessment for both our remote and our hybrid students. However, some of the subtests they eliminated because of that format. So it doesn't allow us to get that same sum score that we've had in the past. So instead of kind of using that as a system data point, teachers and schools are using that obviously to plan their instruction or interventions for students, but I can't really pull this year's PAL score and compare it to previous years. Oops, I have a lot more on that one, Rebecca. Another assessment that we have is our running records, or our reading inventories, the benchmark assessment system, or BAS. And that's something that we do with all K through 6 students. And that the authors of that assessment did not make accommodations for a remote format. So we had to find a different running record assessment. We chose the literacy footprints. And we found, while it does give us good information about that child as a reader, it isn't really comparable with our previous assessment. We do have a lot of common formative assessments that the PLCs look at, or classroom assessments that we use for report cards. And then also we have, been trying to prioritize social emotional learning, and we do have some check-ins with students there. But the one assessment that they didn't really change the administration much is the STAR. I have some information about that on the next slide. So the STAR is just a very kind of quick computer-based assessment. Usually students take maybe 20 minutes on average to complete it. There are 2 tests, reading or ELA and math. We've traditionally used this as kind of a screener. It gives us information about what students might need additional support, or if there's standards that the teacher could work on with a small group, or even with a class. And that's kind of been how we've used it in the past. Sometimes in the past, we've only used this in the fall, unless the student might have flagged for additional testing. So we don't have whole years of data on the STAR, but last year we did do fall and winter testing before the closure for the pandemic. So on the next slide, you can see 2 years of data. The first 2 columns are 2019-20, fall and then winter, and then the next 2 are this year's. That blue bar is the at or above benchmark number. So if you look at the change from fall to winter last year, the number of students who were at or above benchmark increased by the number of 7%. This year, that increase was 5% and slightly lower achievement overall. This is for reading and all of our grades combined, 2 through 6. The next slide shows math, 2 through 6, and almost an identical difference there. So in the last year from fall to winter, we had 7% more students gain that proficiency benchmark, and this year 5, with some lower overall achievement there. So then I was curious about how our students were performing in the 2 different models. So I pulled out, this is just winter for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, because those were the classes that were operating in both models at the time. But I was interested to see if there were any differences between the hybrid and remote. So you can see there the first 2 columns are 2nd grade, and then 3rd grade and 4th grade. And as you can see, both delivery models had very similar achievement. Then if you take a look at math, that bears out in math as well. So I didn't have any other kind of standardized tests to look at, so I pulled a report card standard. There is one standard that really is a common thread throughout all of the grade levels. It's grade level reading. So I looked at the last 3 years of that reading on grade level standard, just for the first trimester, because that's all we've completed now. So this is through the end of November, early December. And so we score that on a report card on a 4-point scale. And I know there's a lot of numbers on this slide. Hopefully you can see it in board book a little clearer, but it's color coded for you, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the standards that we would grade students at did not change. We kept our students at the same high standard this year as we had in previous years. If you look, there are some outliers along, the various grades in the various years. But if you look at that score of 1, the minimal, that's fairly constant over the years. But what's a little larger in this last trimester is the basic, or the score of 2. And so grade level teams right now have just had their universal data meetings. And so they are having conversations about, what can we do to move these students into this level 3 proficiency. If you look at the next slide, this is that same information, but a little less cluttered. It's the combination of proficient and advanced. And so you can take a look at how those compare. There's not really a corollary for math that runs throughout all of the grades. So this was the one that I pulled out. You know, with all of the changes in assessments this year, it was challenging to find some data, but I thought the STAR would give you kind of a glimpse of the past couple of years, and then also the report card data. So those were the pieces that I was able to pull out. So hopefully that gives a little better understanding of kind of how we approach our planning and instruction, and then also kind of what we've seen so far. So before Tim comes, I'm happy to field any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy.
Good evening, everybody. This is a continuation on this update on the instructional approach and, you know, more significantly on, you know, what we're seeing with student performance. And as Amy alluded to, we have done our best to provide information we feel is comparable. There are a lot of things that are different this year, so we did feel we were limited in some respects, but we've done our best. And where there are some significant kind of caveats around comparison, I'll try to note those out. The first thing here is just depicting what we're seeing now that we're into the second semester, what percentage of our students at the different grade levels of the middle school and high school are in a fully remote program, and what percentage are in hybrid. And you can see there's some grade to grade, but we have 72% overall of our students in the hybrid and 28% of our students in the fully remote. I think Amy did a great job of explaining our overall response to this with a PLC approach within the last year of the pandemic. One difference between the lower grades in the middle school and high school is that you don't see the type of grade level planning occurring in the middle school and high school because you have more of a disciplinary approach to each subject. You know, you have English language arts, you have mathematics, you might have a biology team versus, you know, 4th grade science. And so each of these teams have been revisiting their key learning targets for instruction, what they're going to instruct in person, what kind of tasks that they might have done in person with a normal schedule. Do they try to transition to an asynchronous approach? This has been a continual work ever since spring break of last year. And as our teachers have done this in their course teams, kind of the 3 questions they ask are at the very bottom of this slide, which is, does the objective for the course have endurance, meaning does it have long-term value to people? Secondly, does it have leverage? If I'm teaching a course and I'm teaching a concept that not only has implications for my content area, but for other content areas, I want to make sure I retain that in the course. And then lastly, does it contribute to readiness? So we have some disciplines, I think math and world language are the 2 we think of most characteristically, that have more of a sequential approach. You want to make sure that all of the prerequisite skills and concepts for the next course are well represented in the current course. And similarly, if you have something in the first semester that you know is going to be built on for the second semester, you want to make sure that's prioritized as well. That's just kind of the thinking framework our course teams always try to follow. Now what you're going to see, and we'll do this for first the high school and then the middle school, is our current information on how our students did in terms of their course grades for the first semester. And so there are going to be 3 slides per each school. This first one for the high school shows Fs as a percentage of all grades. So if I'm taking 6 courses and I have an F in one of my courses, 16% of my grades, almost 17% of my grades were an F. If I had 3 Fs, it would be 50%. So what you see here, for those of you that either have recently had children in high school or have had teaching experience in high school or kind of think in the way back machine about what high school was like for you, there often is a reality check that occurs for some students at the 4-week mark, which is when we send our first progress report home. And so what I've done here is we have 5 years of data. You can always see at the 4-week progress report that's our most elevated percentage of Fs. Now, it's important to understand at the high school that the only grade that counts on the transcript is the rightmost, the purple column. That is the semester grade that shows on the transcript. At the 4-week, the 9-week, and the 13-week mark at the high school, we send a progress report home, but that's just a snapshot. That's a status, where is the student at that point in time. And so what you see is you see improvement usually from the 4-week report to the reports in the middle of the term, and then as the final grade deadline approaches, where a student is having some challenges, student focus tends to become more acute, teacher focus and the support continues to be there, and quite frankly, the parental focus becomes increasingly acute. And the result is you tend to see a closure in F at the end of the semester. What we see here, though, and I don't think this, we wish it were different, but I don't think it should really surprise us, is given the extraordinary circumstances of the first semester, even with really strong efforts by our teachers, the students, and also by families, we do see an increase in the F percentage. And we can see, in terms of the final grade, it went from last year 2.2% of all grades being an F to 3% of all grades being an F. Next.
But there's a trend there all the way back before COVID even started. You got 18, 19, that's 1.2, 2.2, 3. There's a trend there.
19, 20 in particular, if we didn't have the COVID year and we hadn't been really engaged in the pandemic response, Jack, we probably would be having a conversation about 19, 20 and working on understanding that.
My understanding S1 is first semester?
Yes. Yeah, this is apples to apples. We're not showing second semester grades here. These are just the first semester grades over the last 5 years.
Yeah, well, COVID didn't hit till second semester, right? It went
That's
till March.
exactly the point, yes.
Yeah.
So if we can go to the next slide.
This one?
Yes. So this is our percentage of students with at least 1 F. So in this case, whether I have 1 F or 3 Fs, I show up in the chart. And again, a similar pattern. It's elevated at the start of term. It closes by the end of term. You'll see on this one as well, Jack, that we saw an increase in this last year pre-pandemic. I think when the dust settles, we are going to kind of want to circle back and better understand the phenomenon there. But I think, again, the key point here is, despite everybody's best efforts, the first semester was challenging. We did see an increase in our students with at least 1 F. And the third slide for the high school will show us the impact in terms of average GPA. And you will see that compared to the previous year, we had a 0.11 decrease in average GPA. So, I wish the news were better. It would be a wonderful thing if we could say that there had been no impact on student grades due to pandemic schooling. Unfortunately, there has been some. I think compared to some charts I've seen from other districts outside of our area that have been shared with us, I do think, even though I wish the views were better, I do think these numbers compared to some other places are better. And I really do, commend our students, our high school teachers, and of course the families that are big partners in this process for doing their best to get us through a very challenging first semester. We have the same three phenomena for the middle school. The middle school tends to have a little higher grades, and you will see a larger increase in F percentages at the middle school than at the high school, partly because Fs were fairly uncommon at the middle school to begin with. But you can see in the end result, it went from 0.57% of Fs last year to a 3.2% of all grades this year first semester. And that's definitely a noticeable increase. If we go to the second slide, percent of students with at least one F at the middle school. Again, we see a pretty strong increase in the end from 2.9 to 9.7%. And if we go to the GPA average slide, we see where the high school dropped by 0.11, we have a drop here more in the 0.25 range. So more of an impact at the middle school, and definitely that's something where as we get kids back on campus, more chance, or at least many of our kids back on campus, more chance to have coaching conversations with the students and for students to clarify with teachers about what can they be doing and getting extra assistance during the contact time. The next slide we have, normally you would have seen this in August, but we were busy getting ready to open school in August. This is how our students did on the advanced placement exams in the spring. And what you see here is that we did see a 5% dip this past spring in students scoring a 3 or better on the advanced placement test. I do want to go to the next slide and just put something in context. As I looked at the state and national data, what we saw is nationally and in the state, you didn't see the kind of dip on 3+ that we did on the scores. However, you'll notice that our participation rate increased year on year, and for the state and the nation, the participation rate decreased year on year. I don't want to overread into this. Kind of my working thinking is that at the margin, students nationally and in the state who might have been a little unsure about their situation on the exam chose not to participate, and that might have produced a little more stability. We actually saw a growth in participation, and we did see the 3+ rate go down. So, again, I think this is from back in the spring, but this shows the different nature. Now, the AP exams were very different because these were delivered at home. And so the College Board really did make modifications to the format of the AP. They de-emphasized the multiple choice, and they emphasized performance tasks because those are easier to provide test security in the home. Next, please. Next few slides are all about the one standardized test we give as a local test at the secondary level, and that is the Aspire, which is given in October in the 7th and 8th grade at the middle school. So this represents the impact post-spring break and also the first month or so of school this year. We started Aspire testing on October 12th, and we concluded it around October 26th. You will see, except for 7th grade science, these numbers are remarkably stable. I think what we can attribute this to is by 7th and 8th grade, the Aspire, although it will have some focus on the standards for that grade level, and these are ACT type questions. That's part of the ACT family. They really are building on a student's cumulative knowledge, and really, if we think about April, May, a little bit of June, September into a little bit of October, that's a lot of time when we think about it in an annual term, but in the context of a child's overall education by 7th or 8th grade, it's a smaller part of the experience. So I think that's why we're seeing a little more of a stability here. And if we could just kind of skate through the Aspire slides, Rebecca, and get to the attendance slides. So attendance we record very differently in the first semester this year because students were at home. We had to come up with protocols to mark students as participating or not when they were virtual. And these attendance figures make no attempt to distinguish between the student with their Zoom video on and those with their Zoom video off. It's just, were they participating in the class in some form? We actually see that overall for the district, both the average daily attendance rate is slightly up over the preceding year. And if we go to the second slide, which doesn't look at average attendance, but looks at something called federal chronic absenteeism, which is students who are absent for more than 10% of the days, we can see that absenteeism overall, there are some exceptions, overall is down for the year, or at least the light blue column is the full year last year, and the dark blue column are students that are currently on pace with more than 10% absence. So, while it's been very different, and I think there, are certainly different levels of engagement, we actually see in terms of actually participating in class to a degree, we actually have not noticed a significant drop-off in attendance this year. So that's kind of the very high level, and I think, the bottom line is pandemic schooling isn't the way we were brought up if we were choosing this. It's the hand that's been dealt to us. There have been some impacts. I think they've been, the impact has been managed thanks to everybody's good efforts. But we certainly look forward to a time when we aren't doing this anymore. And all I can say is that our staff are working very hard to support our learners that are struggling, and we hope for a more successful second semester. Questions?
This is really helpful to see the years combined. I thought it was going to be much worse.
I didn't we've been monitoring the progress reports all the way through, but as you can see, the historical trend is there is a closing of the gap at the end. And that was, the unknown until you actually post the grades is how much did things come together at the end. And, staff and students worked very hard. Brian, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
I would just, is this one on, Brian?
We're all on.
All right. I would say that our F data, although raised, will be better. We're doing remediation now with kids. Any classes that we can get them through, we're trying to get them to pass some of those first semester classes. So,
Going back to pass them?
What's that?
They're going back to pass those first?
Meaning that if there's a handful of assignments, as opposed to waiting till summer school to remediate them, we're trying to backfill that now, so and get some of those classes filled. So the kids that really, really struggled, we have to come up with another plan for them. But if they were in a range of, you do these handful of things, and we can get them done in the next few weeks, then we'll have them do that. So some of our teachers are doing that. But our teachers worked incredibly hard to push the kids to the end. It is really hard to make connections with kids when their cameras are dark and they don't engage in class. And we're seeing that a lot. There's a lot of dark cameras, but We're encouraging them to turn cameras on, get engaged, and take part in the class so that we can support them.
Brian, can you just say a couple words just about kind of, obviously, schools, kids have been back in the building for the last few weeks. Kind of what's that feel like and how do you see that?
Feels great. It's good to have some normalcy back. It's been a joy to see them. They're a little bit robotic right now. They're a little bit, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're kind of quiet. It's just the environment the way that it is. It doesn't lend itself to what it was before. It's, with all the safety protocols in place, kids go to class, there's not much chatting. I have to remind them often with the 6 feet, that's not natural for kids. They don't get that yet. I just don't think it's natural for humans, honestly. But we're doing it. And it has been great having kids back. The staff, I think, have enjoyed having kids back. They tell me that the way we're doing things, it's hard, it's challenging. I think Brian mentioned this before, maybe in a class or something, that trying to monitor what's going on in the Zoom, paying attention to the people in the room, responding to a chat over here, a question over here. It is incredibly challenging to manage those different systems that are going on in the classroom and then make sure that you're engaging both learners, the online learners and the kids in your class. But for me personally, it's nice to have kids back. It has provided a bit of normalcy in our lives.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question to either one of you, if you have an idea? The Fs in the middle school, would they also be able to go back and make some of that work up? Are you, either of you aware if that's true?
I would have to go back and ask Jeff. I think, we present the two schools with a very identical look here.
Right.
I think it's important to recognize that how a student does in middle school is an important sign of their learning progress. It can have an influence on their self-efficacy as a learner.
Right.
The middle school transcript goes nowhere, but the high school transcript goes lots of places. So.
Any other questions for Tim, Amy, or put Brian on the hot seat here for a second, so thank you for stepping up. Any other questions for them?
I really appreciate the information. I think our whole community has been looking to have some validation of what the heck we've been doing. I do really appreciate what you're saying.
Thank you, Joe.
Next then, we'll go to the 2021 summer school classes and fees.
All right, on an annual basis, Sheila comes and sees us at this time of the year to talk about 2021 summer school. So thanks, Sheila, for being here and to talk about the courses and course offerings that you're looking at right now.
Thank you for having me. It's that time of year again where it's a little chilly outside and we get to talk a little bit about summer school offerings. So in front of you, you have the listing of enrichment and remedial along with the grade levels they would serve. This coming summer, there's some extra notations. Our intention is that most of our programming will be in person. And of course, we'll be following the guidelines that will be with the current orders, probably looking similar to what we have now. But there are some areas where we also want to offer virtual, and those are in two specific areas. One would be anything remedial, so parents would have the choice of their child as recommended for remedial to be in person or to have that program virtual. The other one is a set of courses that we're running from our elementary, intermediate, and middle school, and the courses are called Getting Ready for Blank Grade. And that's really to answer the need that parents have talked about of really keeping their kiddos in the core their students, in the core content of English language arts and math, going with their learning, moving forward. There'd also be some other skills that would go with that grade level teachers would help us identify that for the students through our PLCs. We'll hit those notes. That will also be in person for students or virtual, again, that core content area. So those are a couple of the changes that are highlighted. We also have some creative thinking, particularly in our music department. Some families may be hesitant to do all 6 weeks of music lessons. Those will still be offered. They can easily transition to virtual if needed. But the other piece of that is they're offering some camps that would be a 1-week commitment by students and their families. So that's a nice addition that we're going to try. In the past, there has been a traditional band camp for our high school students. Last year, there were a couple of other pieces added in, and we're hoping to expand that this year. So I'm excited that the music department came up with those offerings. One piece that you don't have on this list is summer science. That is a course that really depends on a field trip every other day. And kudos last year to our coordinators, Jess and Em, as well as the staff, for flipping that as best they could into a virtual format. Because our businesses that they go to for field trips, as well as some of the camping pieces and what that would entail, it wasn't a possibility. It's not a possibility for this summer either, and based on where the staff was at, the recommendation of the coordinators, and some of the survey results they had from students, they want to pause it this year. And so next year, hopefully things will be in a place where we're going to be able to resume more of our normal activities. And then the idea would be that we bring it back and hopefully be able to do several of our field trips, the capstone camping trip. What we would do then is offer, it's always been for outgoing 6th graders, and it is limited in spots, so we can't just double the program. It doesn't work like that. But what we would do is with the leftover spots, we could offer that in some type of lottery system for those students who missed it this year because it cannot exist, and see if we can capture some of that in. So I did want you to know that through the recommendation of the 2 co-chairs for that, for summer science, as well as the staff and some of their survey results, we're putting that on pause. So that's the big picture of summer school. A couple pieces that each of these courses will need to work around is whatever order we're in for social distancing impacts the number of seats that we have, and how we might be able to work around the needs to comply with those, keep students, staff safe, and then also fill family schedules. So we're going to have to be creative, particularly at the elementary and intermediate school levels. That's where they could have a harder time filling their schedules. So we're looking at some pieces about what we can do with that if a student's schedule isn't full, or we're still able to have those students in the school and maybe rotate between some activities of interest, again, following the guidelines. So it could be that they do have some time with technology. It could be that they have some structured movement or recess type of thing. Again, it will depend on the order that we're working under and what we can do at each level that would be unique and supportive of families to have that full schedule. Do you have questions for me?
Great program.
Yeah, very nice. We'll just keep our fingers crossed.
That's right. So do we have to approve this?
Yes, we do.
I make the motion to approve summer classes and fees as presented.
Is there a second?
Sure.
Judy's winning all night long.
I'm not even competing with her.
I gotta say, the community will love the fee structure you set up. It's just going to be great the last couple of years. Any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. So that takes us to our request for planning remote learning after COVID.
The next two items are really in response to some conversations we've had as a board over the last, if you go back to probably our retreat a year ago, there was a request that before we kind of move down the road of planning too deeply into some areas, that there would be a desire for the board to hear kind of what our intent is and hear about things before they actually come to you as a formal presentation in May. This is one I think we've talked about before, and so it's not new to anybody. It was on our goal sheet we talked about earlier. But Amy and Tim had put together just a very high-level memo, and our request is really for us to be able to put some concerted effort and time into planning for remote learning post-COVID. Now we realize that not knowing exactly where things fall this summer and where family comfort levels are, we may have some families that want to stay in that model, and we want to be responsive to that. And then moving forward as well, we feel that this is something that we should have a more robust response to and plan for in the future. So this is something I'm just looking for really the endorsement of the board for us to move forward with further planning in this area. Tim and Amy would be leading this and working with our staff with what that might look like, and we would bring a proposal forward in the future.
I move this planning forward for virtual learning.
Is there a second?
I'd like to put an amendment on that. Just put a date. Can we have something in May that we can take a look at?
I'd like to have some things that you can look at as we hit the budget cycle. So that first draft is in May, so shooting by that period of time to at least give you an idea of what we're looking at.
So at the May board meeting.
Does that work for you guys?
It'll work for us. Will it work for parents? We'll have to see.
Is there a second for the amendment?
Sure.
So just voting to set a date of May to the motion. All those in favor say aye.
So what are we saying comes?
I think what Jack wants is he wants the report in May. He wants
Or earlier?
Or earlier. So I don't.
May or
We haven't really talked timeline on our end. We were just really trying to get this out there so we could get some things in place. But I haven't talked about when we present it here to the board. Obviously, if there's dollar impacts, which there may be, it has to be part of our budget discussions. Our first draft of the budget goes in May.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Jack, because it's well thought out. I mean, I'm hearing people say, like, I need to figure out what I'm doing next year, because if we're not more back to normal, they might make a decision to not be here. So at least being able to express that there's some acceleration in terms of planning would be the right thing to do.
And I think part of some of these pieces too, as we start not only looking at the remote piece, we want to find out how many families may want to stay remote, or how many as we're in person, which is where our intent and our hope is to be, will be returning to us, so that we can plan accordingly with our enrollment, our class sizes, and also accordingly with what our actual requested need level will be for continued remote instruction.
And I just want to piggyback on that for a moment. For families and members of the public listening at home, if we can, we don't know about, masking requirements and things like that, but if we can be in regular session in the fall, we intend to be in regular session if we're allowed to be in regular session. But even in that scenario, not all children may be vaccinated by September. There may be families that will want to keep their unvaccinated child out. We don't know how prevalent that desire will be. And we also have heard that there are students who found the virtual delivery model suitable for them. Again, we don't know, is that 2%, 5%, 15%? That's going to be a key part of what we'll do between now and May. But even with business as usual, we anticipate there will be a certain increase in demand for remote learning, and that's what's motivating Amy's work and my work here.
This is probably a premature question because I'm not going to be around once you're actually voting to deal with it, but is it possible to have basically like a virtual charter set up by September that covers 10% of the district?
So we would only need a virtual charter if we were taking non-resident pupils. I don't think we can create a virtual charter for next year. That would be, historically that's been something previous boards have not chosen to pursue, but times change. We could potentially look at a virtual charter for subsequent years if that was an interest.
Yeah, I would say it would be a staged conversation. The first one is making sure that we have a response and a service to our families for the fall. And then after that, it's a conversation of do we want to explore anything further that may include a virtual charter, which would allow them, like open enrollment students, to be able to participate.
Sure, Maybe throwing the C word in there wasn't proper to do that. I mean, just like something that's set up just for students that are 100% virtual to kind of pull them out of whatever elementary they're in, for example. It doesn't have to be a charter. It could just be all virtual. They don't have a dedicated building.
Right, and that's a piece we have virtual, prior to COVID, we've had virtual programs. It's always been a challenge as far as how much of a child's program is acceptable as far as them to earn credits and move forward. So I think what this is doing is really opening up the conversation to be able to have for those families that want that either as a full program or as some sort of a blended learning option, that we have some flexibility.
I mean, historically, we've never gone below 7th grade. So one thing we would be looking at would be what might a remote option look like below 7th grade. And then we've had, and you can see this in the course book for the high school, specific criteria that would guide when a middle school or high school student would access virtual learning. And obviously, we would be kind of looking at a modification of that.
I would like to call the vote.
Would this also be covering students that we have used this for, that for one reason or another, they can't attend one of our schools in person?
Yes.
We used to use McFarland's charter, but to some degree, didn't we?
No.
No?
Those would be cases where the families wanted the size of like the McFarland program. We've had kids do virtual part-time at the middle school and high school, and in any given year, we have a handful, and I say literally a handful, of students that are full-time virtual at the middle school and high school.
We're part of Wisconsin Virtual Academy.
Wisconsin eSchool.
Thank you. So that's what we're part of, so we're able to access some of that catalog.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
So did we just vote
So
on the
that was for the
amendment?
amendment, right?
That's for the amendment.
Yeah.
Now we're back to the main thing about opening up the concept of planning for the post-COVID remote learning with a date of.
Bring it back to May meeting.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Next is the request to solicit RFP for mental health partnership.
Kurt's walking up to the table here. Kurt and I have had a number of conversations over the last few years about lack of access to students who need additional mental health services. And when we take a look at, we have school-based mental health services and professionals in our schools, but for families and students who need something in a clinical setting, access has been a very challenging piece. And for some of those students, it's a matter of transportation, it's a matter of missing school. And as we've looked at some of our colleague districts around, there have been districts that have successfully implemented a partnership with a clinic. Basically, in short, it's something where we would have an in-kind part of contribution where we would give them space within a school, and they would be able to operate within parameters to service students out of our school for mental health services. Pieces that are important to us are groups that are able to take a wide variety of insurance and meet the needs of our kids who have the ability to pay and not pay. So as what we're bringing forward in front of you tonight is not a proposal, but it's really, again, the concept that we would like to explore. The best way for us to explore that is to go out to an RFP process to see what people can put forward as a proposal to us. We've seen proposals of other districts that have had a dollar amount associated with it, and others that it's been solely just an in-kind contribution of space. But we also want to make sure that we are vetting this out in as thoroughly of a manner as possible, and we felt the RFP process was the way to go. Kirk, I know you've had more conversations, you and Chris, with your team. Anything to add on what the concept entails?
No, I think those are the highlights in our request that we would then kick out to any interested parties. We would want it very clearly articulated, as Randy said, what relationships do they have with the various health plans and insurance companies to make sure that we have the largest amount of coverage possible, because not everybody accepts everything. And then what do we do with people who have large deductibles and or no insurance? Can those individuals access services? Because that is a population that needs to have access to it as well. So those are a couple of the highlights that we want to make sure that the proposal does cover, so that we know what the party would be able to do or what they wouldn't be able to do.
I would see this as something that as we receive those, there'd probably be conversations. If what we see views favorably, we'd want to have some level of an interview with them where we'd be happy to invite members of the board to be part of that. But this is kind of what we view as our information gathering before we're able to move any further.
I think that's an exciting and important endeavor. Are there grants? I mean, we're doing the Bridges program with Dane County, but are there grants available to help support some of these kind of endeavors, or?
Well, there can be. The challenge with grants is there's always a sunset of the grant and typically a phasing out of the grant. So then you have to look at sustainability with that. Chris is actually leading a group that will be writing a mental health grant through the Department of Public Instruction, but we're really focusing that on professional development for our staff and not a service provision, because whenever you have a grant that you're relying on to provide services, there's always the possibility that at the snap of a finger, that grant is gone, and then you kind of get in this ethical conundrum of, I've started this up and now I'm going to pull the rug out from under, and that just doesn't feel good. So I would stay away from grants to fund this and use your grants on those more one-time kind of expenses versus that sustainable effort that you would need with something like this.
So Randy, you've looked at other proposals. What kind of dollar figures are being put towards
I
that?
think we've seen ones that are literally just in kind, give us a space, give us a conference room, and there's no outlay in dollars. And I think other ones, upper end, 60 grand, Kurt, something like that.
60, 63.
Yeah, so you're between 0 and 60 grand, depending on different, it's really how do you help to manage some of the students who can't afford to contribute, and it's either helping to subsidize that or it's part of the actual proposal that the group brings forward. That's why we want to go through this process, is to vet that out. But I don't see it as a significant dollar amount either way, and it's something that we'd like to explore.
Some agencies, as a service to the community, set aside a portion of their budget to cover those underinsured and uninsured. Other agencies do not. And then we look at us as the host to fill that gap. So that's, again, why we want to, when we put together the request, we want to cast a large net so that we see what works best for us. Because again, some agencies are approved by all the insurance companies, and some agencies have very limited insurance coverages, which again, if we choose one of them, if you don't have the right insurance, you're out of luck with that. So that's why we want to roll this out to a wide net with what we would like to see in it, and get back from the people who are submitting the proposals, what can they do so that our obligation is as small as it possibly can be.
I'll put a motion to approve the beginning of the process.
Second.
Oh, any discussion?
Yeah, I mean, have we already gotten proposals from specific companies who want to do this? Because I recall, I mean, like last year, there was that issue of, it was a story in the Tribune that was kind of, I guess oddly worded, it wasn't clear, but it seemed to be like one specific business was saying they already were going to work with the district, and then the story got changed to say there was a memorandum with the district saying something or other. It wasn't a memorandum that the district actually signed, but the story seemed to imply that the district already was working with this company, so.
Yeah, I can answer that one. I think what Kurt and I have done is over the last couple of years, we've talked to a few different providers as far as what they've done. In the case that you're referencing, they did share with us an agreement. You're right, we did not sign it. And I think as we started, nothing negative or contradictory there, but I think we feel that trying to toss out an RFP makes the most sense for to see which model and which group fits us the best, and also involve our student services team who would be working closely with them to be able to be part of that process as well, as opposed to just picking a sole provider and deciding to work with them. Sure.
I mean, I have a certain amount of caution, and I appreciate Jack bringing up just questions about it in general, because it usually segues into me saying something different but having the same concern, just in that I'm all for dealing with mental health and doing everything we can for that. I'm just cautious that, is that a school district's job? I mean, I would gladly pay for health care for everybody if I had the authority to do that. I don't, and never will. What's the school district's focus? Is it providing mental health care or health care in general to kids?
I think the challenge, and I'm preaching to the choir, Mike, is if you've got a family that needs some of these services, it's a 3-month wait to get in to see a provider. And we don't have very many. Until recently, we haven't had a provider in our community. Now I think we have two clinics. But it's definitely been a limiting factor as far as access. So as we've looked around and talked to different districts who've tried to approach and brainstorm through the same process, this was a way that we felt we could at least bring it in closer. I think the auxiliary benefit is it also gives us access to some mental health providers at a clinical setting to help advise us from a professional development piece. It's absolutely not a place that I guess 10 years ago I thought we would be as a school, but I think when we're looking at the needs of kids and trying to service some of the needs they have, it's a piece we have to look at. But I want to try to minimize the outlay that we have on cost. If our outlay can be space and that can provide access, I think that's a positive piece. And then if there is a cost, then I think we have to look creatively at how we can utilize it.
I think it's a smart move, especially at this time, that we look at something like this, so.
Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That takes us to the second Friday count.
Yep. Well, we count students twice a year for DPI purposes and funding purposes, the third Friday in September and the second Friday in January. What you see in your packet right now is the second Friday in January count. You can see that we have an increase of 15 students between the September count and the January count dates. Question I had was from a board member was, well, where are those kids coming from? And there's not a simple answer, because the spreadsheet's relatively long, and it just shows that we have kids, just like in any other year, moving in and moving out. So we have kids that are moving in from other states, other communities. We have families that have left. We have seen a few that have joined us from open enrollment from some of our districts around us that have come in. We've had, where we've had room, there's not very many of those because we don't have very many open enrollment spaces. We've seen a few come from a couple private schools, but it's been pretty much, there's not really a trend that I can say coming and going. But it's a positive number, and that'll be a piece as we plan for the next year, trying to get solid predictions as far as what this might look like when we return in the fall.
Any questions? Now, exchange students.
Exchange students is one I put on last minute because it's every year we get requests for foreign exchange students. They've actually started earlier this year, so there are some that are looking at wanting to find exchange placements. We received one just a week or two ago to the high school, an agency that was hoping to be able to place a student here in Waunakee, and I think they were at very early stages of talking to host families.
Randy, I'm going to make the recommendation that we don't host exchange students.
Yeah, and that's what Brian and I were thinking, is this is
So-
a lot of some of the unknowns,
some of the
just
air.
saying, let's hold for a year, but
Yep.
that's for our position. That's what we wanted to bring forward, because there is a policy on it.
Is there a second? Mike? Seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And correspondence?
I don't think I have any tonight.
I don't think so. Consent agenda, we can vote it all through as a package, or someone can request something to be pulled out. I would like to request the McPherson Family Trust and the David Becker donation be pulled out so that I can abstain.
I was gonna ask it to be pulled out so I could make money for it, but.
Go ahead. You'll be allowed to anyway. So is there any other part that anyone would want pulled out? Then.
I would like to recognize the donors from all the gifts, if we could.
Hometown Pharmacy donated $117, I think it was. I can't remember the exact amount, to the Student Financial Aid Fund. And there was a leg press machine donated to the intermediate school from...
Steve and Nikki Stricker.
Yeah.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve the agenda with those two items pulled out.
That's correct.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Now, the other two items,
Motion to approve the other two items, the donations.
Second.
and I would really like to thank the McPherson Trust because they initially pledged $1,000 to match whatever I could raise, but since I got to 1,400, he just decided to double it all, which is extremely generous of him. Is there is a second, any discussion?
Only thing I wanted to add to is just that in the hullabaloo of publicizing that, your fundraising, everything else, there were some other donations that came in directly to the class community site. So there were people like Shaquille DeYoung who donated $518. That just came in through there. I talked to her online one day and I think she just got mad and decided to make a donation. And that's not included here, but it ended up there. Christine Hamilton, Stacy Loomis, some other people all came in at the same time. So it's appreciated when people go in there and kick in something like that. Some good came out of everything.
I'm hoping maybe next year we'll have a challenge on the board to see which board member can find the most donations for it, as a way to just do this as an annual basis. But we'll see if you accept that challenge next year.
There we go.
So there's a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And I abstain. Now we, on to the board business. Anything on the legislative?
Not at this moment.
Luckily, they're quiet right now, except for and now we need to set up a few meetings?
Yep. Brian, you need an HR meeting, is that correct?
Yes, please.
All right, so I'll let you kind of coordinate when you'd like. The HR committee is Joan, Brian, and Judy.
I know, Joan, you said daytime is going to be possible for you now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had anything you want to start with. What
Well,
work?
I know Judy's out of town for a week. I don't know where you're at. And I could finagle some daytime. I do have a husband who,
So, you know, I can work around just about everything that will work for you guys, so.
I'm back on the
hoping you guys
18th. So you want it before then?
Well, I mean, the 18th would work, I think would be okay. If it works for Joan and Brian, that's fine with me.
yeah, I can do the 18th.
I'd have to do it after 4.
You know, Iowa plays Wisconsin that day. What time's the game? Anyway.
You know, I'm not sure.
4 o'clock? Yeah, we can do 4. Or after 4.
At 4:30?
4:30.
I'm getting COVID shots then.
No, good for you.
Good for you. Let's do 4:30.
4:30 on the 18th, great.
So what day was that, Brian? I'm sorry.
Thursday, February 18th.
All right, thank you. All right. And I saw Jack just walked out, I'll catch him. The Goals Committee, Mike, Dave, and Brian. I think this is kind of a follow-up to what we wanted to do from the retreat.
So this is kind of yours, what David works
I think we could do,
You looking the last week in February?
yeah, let's look at that. 22nd, 23rd.
That is insane. I have nothing that week. So anything after 4 o'clock or later.
Mike, how about you?
That'll work for me.
I'm fine. And then Brian?
I'm okay.
That work? Either day better, Monday or Tuesday? Either.
Same.
Let's do Monday. What time did you say, Dave?
4 o'clock is as soon as I could get here.
Is 4 o'clock okay?
Better than later.
Okay, so 4 o'clock on the 22nd. I'd also like a budget committee probably the week of March 1st. So,
Medical advisory is on the 2nd.
yeah, that's at 6. So budget is Jack, Mark, and Joan.
Any day works.
Could we do it on the 2nd and do it at like 5 o'clock? We have an hour.
March 2nd, 5 o'clock.
March 2nd, if we did it at 5, medical advisory's already at 6, just back them up to each other.
Sure. Yeah,
Does that work? Okay, I've got budget, I've got HR, I've got goals.
Did we need a curriculum? I didn't ask them.
Don't know. I don't know. I think that's all I need right now.
Okay, motion
Is
to
it-
adjourn.
Second. Motion to adjourn and a second by Judy. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, stay as one. Thank you very much, everybody.
Everybody.
And thank you to our fine IT support staff.